Hey guys, tonight we are going to wander out to the ragged edge of the world, where land shrinks into a toothy shoreline and the ocean endlessly gnaws at rock like some cosmic dog with a favorite bone. The air is wet here, briny and sharp, and the gulls overhead are already circling with that judgmental glare they seem born with. You probably won't survive this, honestly, not because it's especially dangerous, but because you'd likely keel over from boredom before your first week is done. But that's the point tonight, the slow, steady, and entirely unremarkable life of a 19th century lighthouse keeper. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching, I'd love it if you drop your location and local time down in the comments. I always like knowing where in the world you're tuning in from, whether you're sprawled on a couch in Minnesota or sneaking a listen on a night train through Prague. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the lonely shore with one sea-soaked trunk and more nerves than courage. The boat that dropped you off is already pulling away, its oars slapping the water like a slow applause. The men on board give a quick wave, polite, perfunctory, but you can see in their faces the quiet relief of not being you. They'll head back toward the mainland, toward taverns, warm beds, and the kind of chaos humans crave. You, meanwhile, are stuck here, on this rock with its squat white tower, where the wind already seems to be peeling away at your ears. You trudge over the uneven stones, boots slipping in spots made slick with algae. Your trunk is heavy, though it doesn't contain much, some spare clothes, a pocket Bible, a small journal, and a handful of letters from family who probably didn't know what else to say except be careful and we'll miss you. The lighthouse looms above, taller than you imagined, its lantern chamber glinting faintly in the late afternoon sun. The keeper you're replacing is waiting at the door. He looks like someone sculpted from driftwood and piped smoke, his beard tangled, his hands permanently stained with lamp oil. He doesn't bother with a handshake. Instead, he grunts, nods toward the door, and mutters something like, "Don't let the gulls drive you mad. They nearly got me." A joke, maybe. Or maybe not. You step inside, and the smell hits first, salt, smoke, a trace of mildew, and that faint metallic tang of rust eating at everything. The stairway curves upward like the ribcage of a great beast. You imagine the many boots that have worn down these steps, men long gone, some who returned home and some who didn't. The keeper doesn't give you a tour, he just thrusts a ring of keys into your hand, mutters about a supply boat due in 3 weeks, and says he'll sleep in the boat shed until dawn, then be gone. And just like that, the torch, or in this case, the wick, is passed. You haul your trunk up into the living quarters. The room is plain, a cot, a desk, a chair with one leg shorter than the rest, and shelves lined with old logs. The walls sweat a little with damp, as though the sea is forever trying to seep in. There's a kettle, though, and a small stove. You'll be fine. Or at least you'll be alive. Outside, the sun is lowering. Your first official act as keeper is simple but heavy with symbolism. You step out onto the gallery, turn, and look at the sea, not just glance, but truly take it in, the endless gray-blue plate stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, ships cut across the water, their captains depending on you not to sleep through your shifts. Somewhere out there, storms are gathering like gossip. Somewhere out there, entire histories will unfold, and none of them will have your name in them. That's the first thing you learn about lighthouse life. You are important but not memorable. People will thank the keeper in passing, but no one will recall your face. Your light is a character in their stories, not you. Historians still argue whether this anonymity was a blessing or a curse, whether keepers found solace in invisibility, or whether the silence eventually hollowed them out. You'll have plenty of nights to form your own opinion. For now, You busy yourself with small details. You wipe the sweat from your brow, run a hand over the cold stone wall, and listen to the distant hiss of waves striking rock. Somewhere nearby, a gull screams like a toddler denied a toy, and you laugh under your breath. At least something out here has a sense of drama. Dinner is whatever the last keeper left behind, a tin of hardtack biscuits and a small wedge of cheese with more personality than taste. You chew, staring out the slit window, and try not to think about how this might be your menu for weeks. Still, there's a comfort in routine, even a routine you've only just begun. Humans are adaptable creatures. You can learn to love stale bread if it means survival. As night descends, you fetch a lantern and climb the stairs. The spiral feels endless, each step echoing like a heartbeat. At the top, the lantern room awaits, its great glass lens dark for now, waiting for your hand. You strike a match, trim the wick, and light the flame. The mechanism hums faintly as you set it in motion, the beam sweeping across the black sea. And there it is, your first light. It doesn't feel dramatic at first. The beam arcs, returns, arcs again, repetitive, hypnotic. But when you lean against the railing and watch the glow reach out into the void, you sense the weight of it. Somewhere, a sailor glances up, sees that flash, and adjusts his course. He'll never know your name, but he'll live another day because of your monotony. There's a quiet kind of heroism in that. Of course, you're already thinking, what if you oversleep one night? What if the oil runs out, or the wick snaps, or you simply forget? Well, let's be honest, you probably won't survive the paperwork if that happens. Lighthouse authorities were ruthless about logs, inspections, and fines. Miss a light, and you wouldn't just lose your job, you might carry the guilt of wrecked ships. Not exactly bedtime friendly, but hey, someone had to tell you. You return to your quarters, the beam above sweeping in its rhythm. You pull off your boots, sit on the cot, and stare at the damp ceiling. The room creaks with the wind, and the sea hums below like an organ tuned to melancholy. You think about your family, about warm firesides, about markets and chatter and things that don't smell perpetually of fish. Then you sigh, because tomorrow you'll wake, climb those stairs, trim that wick, and do it all over again. Unremarkable, yes. But strangely soothing, too. The morning comes with no rooster crowing, no market chatter, no neighbor rattling a cart down cobblestones. Instead, you're pulled awake by the slap of waves against rock and the long, dragging sigh of wind around the tower. The sheets are damp, as if the sea has crept in to tuck you with its clammy hands. For a moment you lie there, not sure if it's day at all, the light is pale, watery, hesitant. When you finally sit up, your spine cracks like a fire log. Welcome to your first full day as a lighthouse keeper. The routine begins even before you've figured out if you like it. You shuffle up the spiral stairs, still barefoot, carrying a small oil can. The lantern chamber greets you with its lingering smell of smoke and hot metal. The flame has guttered out in the early gray hours, as it should, but soot streaks the glass panes. You set about cleaning. Wipe, polish, scrape, refill. It feels ceremonial, like tending a shrine that only the sea gods and the occasional sailor will ever witness. You quickly realize, the real work isn't in the lighting, it's in the maintenance. Every surface is in rebellion. Salt air chews through metal faster than a toddler through candy. Glass fogs, gears grind, and the brass framework tarnishes like it holds a personal grudge. There's even a manual, an actual printed booklet that scolds you in stern Victorian prose about polishing schedules, wick trimming, and diligent avoidance of idleness. You flip through it and half expect a line to appear that says, also, do stop staring dreamily out the window and get back to work. By mid-morning, you're down in the storeroom, taking inventory. Barrels of lamp oil. crates of candles, a few sacks of flour that already smell faintly sour. You tug at the edges of a box to discover a scattering of dried beans and, oh yes, the first mouse. It streaks into the shadows before you can react, a tiny reminder that you're not as alone here as you thought. Congratulations, you're now a hotelier for vermin. And yet, there's comfort in counting. Each item has a purpose. Each purpose links to survival. Beans, flour, oil, water, these are the puzzle pieces of your months ahead. You're not just marking time here, you're rationing it. By afternoon, you venture outside. The air is clearer now, the horizon sharp. The lighthouse sits not on a cozy hill but on a jagged spit of rock that juts like a broken tooth from the sea. You wander along narrow paths, careful not to slip where moss has made things slick. There's a small garden patch, not much more than a rectangle of stubborn soil surrounded by stones. The last keeper must have tried to coax potatoes here. A few straggly vines confirm his limited success. You squat, dig a little with your fingers, and laugh. It's less a farm, more a culinary dare. Still, you're grateful for the sight of green. Out here, even weeds feel like a victory. Later, with the sun warming the stones, you sit on a boulder and just listen. The surf crashes. Gulls wheel and argue overhead. Once in a while, the distant shape of a ship passes, its sails a pale triangle against the horizon. You lift a hand in a half-wave, even though you know no one's looking your way. The isolation begins to settle in. You realize you haven't spoken a full sentence since yesterday. You mutter something under your breath just to hear your own voice bounce back off stone. It's not Shakespeare, more like, well, this is stupid, but still, it reassures you. Later, you'll probably start narrating your own actions like a character in a novel. And now he stirs the pot of beans with heroic vigor. Don't worry, every keeper does it. By dusk, you're back up in the lantern room. This time, lighting the lamp feels less ceremonial and more like punching in for a shift. Match strike, wick trimmed, oil steady. You step back and watch the great lens flare alive, the light carving the night into slices. There's satisfaction in it, sure, but also the creeping sense that this beam is the only conversation partner you'll have for weeks. And here's where history pokes in. During the 19th century, keepers across Europe and America often reported the same thing, crushing monotony. Government reports praise unflinching diligence and discipline, but between the lines you can sense it, men slowly unraveling under the endless repetition. Some wrote poetry, some carved ships in bottles, and some found recreation in drinking the lamp oil itself. Yes, really. Whale oil, in particular, had a reputation as an unfortunate substitute for whiskey. Your stomach turns just imagining it. Historians still argue whether this boredom was an occupational hazard or a test of character, that is, whether keepers went mad because of the isolation, or whether only the eccentric ones signed up in the first place. You, standing alone in the lantern glow, aren't sure which camp you'll fall into. Back downstairs, supper is little more than boiled beans and the last crumb of cheese. You chew, staring at the desk where the logbook waits. Every night, you're expected to record weather conditions, passing ships, supply levels, and any noteworthy events. Tonight you scribble, clear sky, light wind, one bark sighted southward, nothing else. It feels inadequate. You're tempted to add, also, the gulls continue their vendetta against my sanity. But perhaps best not. The hours stretch. You pace. You poke the fire. You listen to the tower creak as waves slap the foundation. And finally, when the cot pulls you back, you lie awake longer than you mean to, tracing cracks in the ceiling with your eyes. You think about the city lights you'll never see, the gossip you'll never hear, the faces you'll forget. Then the beam above sweeps through your window, casting a rhythm of light and dark, like the world's slowest heartbeat. And against that pulse, you finally drift to sleep. Morning doesn't sneak in so much as it barges through the cracks. The gulls resume their screaming, nature's least charming alarm clock, and the wind rattles the shutters like it has a personal vendetta against your REM cycle. You roll out of bed with the grace of a falling sack of potatoes. Your back twinges, your knees mutter, and your stomach reminds you in no uncertain terms that beans are not a one-course wonder. Welcome to day 2 of being the reluctant monarch of stone, sea, and squeaky hinges. Breakfast is a negotiation. Do you boil more beans? Open a jar of pickled fish? Attempt bread with the flour that already smells faintly like a damp cellar? You settle on the least tragic option, and as you chew, you find yourself missing the bustling market you used to wander. Fresh apples, warm rolls, chatter. Here, the only chatter comes from a mouse who has decided your storeroom is the Ritz-Carlton of rodent luxury. You catch it peeking from a crack. You glare. It glares back. Neither of you blink. You both know who will win in the long run, and it isn't the human. Tasks await, though. The manual from yesterday practically barks from memory: polish, oil, inspect. So, once again, you climb the spiral, oil can in hand. The lamp stands there like a needy pet, glorious when lit, but demanding constant care. You wipe the glass with ragged cloth, polish the brass until it grudgingly shines, check the wick length like some obsessive barber. By the time you're done, the whole chamber smells like singed oil and soap. It strikes you how mechanical the job is. You're not some romantic guardian of the coast, you're a glorified custodian with very shiny responsibilities. And yet, when you finish, when the glass gleams so clean you can almost see your face in it, there's a private sense of pride. Sailors out there won't know your name, won't care who's up here polishing, but their lives, at least in some tiny percentage, depend on the shine of your elbow grease. By late morning, the supply ledger demands attention. You sit at the desk, quill scratching, counting tins of salted pork, tallying candle stubs, estimating how long the flour will last if you don't get a shipment soon. Government regulations in the 1800s required meticulous record-keeping, and inspectors were notorious for showing up unannounced months later to check whether every ounce of oil had been accounted for. Some keepers joked that the real hazard wasn't drowning at sea, but drowning in paperwork. After lunch, if we can dignify half-burnt bread and cheese with that title, you face your next duty, the garden. Or what passes for one. The patch of dirt is stubborn as ever, wind-whipped, salty. You kneel, tug weeds, pat down soil, murmur something vaguely encouraging to a potato shoot. You half expect it to roll its leafy eyes at you. Still, you know that in 19th century postings, any fresh produce was like gold. Scurvy wasn't some old-timey pirate joke, it was a constant danger. Entire garrisons of men had rotted teeth and bleeding gums just because someone forgot to ship lemons. You're suddenly more invested in that potato than in most human relationships you've had. The afternoon drags, and with no ships in sight, you find your attention turning inward. The tower itself becomes a playground of details, the way the iron bolts sweat rust, the way the stone sweats damp, the way every stair creaks in its own unique key. You start naming them like they're characters. Step 23 is whiny. Step 42 has a cough. Step 60 is perpetually sulky. See? This is how isolation works. You become the friend of architecture. Now, let's slide in a historical tidbit before you lose your grip entirely. Did you know that some lighthouses of this era had to be manned by 2 keepers, sometimes even 3, because governments learned the hard way that leaving one poor soul alone for months ended badly? There are reports of single keepers abandoning their posts, going mute, or painting cryptic symbols on the walls. One particularly odd case involved a keeper who allegedly trained seagulls to fetch scraps for him. Historians still argue whether that tale is true or just exaggerated gossip, but wouldn't it be incredible if you could outsource your grocery runs to an army of feathered interns? As evening folds in, the tower feels like it's shrinking. You prep the lamp again, your hands already moving by rote. Trim wick, refill oil, light. The great lens blooms awake, its glow turning the sea into a polished sheet of ink. You lean against the railing and watch the beam sweep. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm is hypnotic. It's like rocking in a cradle the size of the world. Dinner is even less glamorous than breakfast. A strip of salted pork, boiled to the texture of leather, washed down with rainwater that tastes faintly of rust. You chew slowly, half imagining you're at some elegant city inn. Ah yes, the chef's special tonight is pork jerky à la brine, with notes of desperation. You laugh aloud at your own joke. There's no one to hear, but the laughter feels good in your chest. Before bed, you write in the logbook. Weather, steady wind, light chop. Ships, none. Events, mouse continues residency. You almost sketch its tiny silhouette in the margin but think better of it. Some humorless inspector might not appreciate your rodent cartoons. And finally, you tuck into your cot, the sheets smelling faintly of sea and smoke. Sleep hovers but doesn't pounce. Instead, you lie there, counting the rotations of the light as it sweeps through your window. The tower breathes with you. Outside, the waves slap in steady rhythm. Inside, your thoughts circle, the garden, the mouse, the lamp, the endless repetition. And then, right before you drift, you realize the strangest truth. Today, for all its monotony, was exactly what you signed up for. Nothing remarkable happened. Which, out here, is the definition of success. The first thing you notice in the morning is the smell. Damp stone, stale oil, and the faint tang of salt clinging to every surface. It's like living inside a soggy pretzel that somebody forgot in a brine barrel. You roll over on the cot, trying to ignore the ache in your shoulders, but the gulls outside remind you that laziness is a luxury not granted to lighthouse keepers. Their squawking could peel paint. You mumble something rude about their family lineage and swing your legs to the floor. Another day, another round of chores. You've barely washed your face in the basin when you catch sight of movement near the storeroom. Your mouse friend, or maybe one of his extended cousins, has returned for breakfast. You tap the wall with a spoon. The creature vanishes with all the guilt of someone who knows he'll be back later anyway. You sigh. Out here, the wildlife is less guest and more roommate. After a rushed breakfast of bread so dry it could be used as construction material, you prepare to step outside. Today's agenda, weather duty. One of the lesser-known tasks of 19th-century lighthouse keepers was keeping meticulous weather logs. The authorities wanted details, barometer readings, wind directions, cloud formations, so that ships and meteorologists alike could benefit from your lonely observations. Which is fine, except the barometer is fickle, the wind gauge squeaks like an asthmatic accordion, and clouds, you discover, look exactly the same after a week of staring at them. Puffy, ominous, or about to ruin your lunch. Those are your three categories. Still, you dutifully jot down readings. The air feels heavier today, the kind of pressure that makes your ears clog. Storm maybe? Or maybe it's just your imagination running wild. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers' weather reports were reliable science or just elaborate guesses written down to appease the higher-ups. Judging by your current methodology, you lean toward the latter. Once the data is inked into the log, you patrol the shoreline. The waves have chewed more at the rocks since yesterday. Driftwood lies tangled like the bones of ancient sea creatures. You find a cracked glass bottle rolling in the tide, seaweed stuffed inside. For a thrilling moment you hope it's a message, some desperate sailor's cry for rescue or a secret lover's confession. But no! Just waterlogged weeds. You toss it back into the surf with a theatrical flourish. And stay gone, you mutter, pretending you're in some grand drama instead of a sand-crusted sideshow. By midday, the real labor begins, cleaning the tower's ironwork. Rust is the eternal enemy here, creeping like ivy across hinges, bolts, and railings. You attack it with wire brushes, arms aching, sweat stinging your eyes. The rhythmic scrape 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 becomes a kind of chant. You almost start humming along. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall that some keepers actually composed little sea shanties for themselves to stave off monotony. A quirky tidbit, one infamous keeper was rumored to have sung the same four-line ditty about boiled cabbage every single day for 20 years. His neighbors, half a mile away, allegedly complained. Historians still argue whether the complaints were genuine or just another bit of coastal gossip, but you like the idea of irritating people at such an impressive distance. After hours of scrubbing, you pause, stretch, and gaze at the sea. A sail flickers on the horizon. Just one, far away, too distant to make out the flag. Still, your pulse quickens. Ships are proof that you aren't forgotten, that beyond your little stone kingdom, commerce and travel continue. You imagine the crew squinting toward your light, grateful in some abstract way. They don't know you, but you're part of their story, however briefly. You raise a hand like a monarch acknowledging unseen subjects. Then you drop it because, honestly, you look ridiculous waving at the horizon. Lunch is beans again, because of course it is. You try seasoning them with a pinch of dried herbs from the garden. It doesn't help. Beans taste like beans. You briefly consider catching a gull, but you decide that level of desperation belongs to month 3 you, not day 4 you. The afternoon clouds darken, and the wind stiffens. A storm is definitely coming. You move quickly, checking shutters, securing ropes, making sure loose items won't become airborne missiles. The air grows electric. You can taste metal on your tongue. When the first thunder crack splits the sky, it rattles the tower all the way down to your bones. The storm is merciless, a show of power meant to remind you that humans are tiny, temporary things clinging to rocks. Rain lashes sideways, pelting your windows so hard it feels personal. The lighthouse sways slightly, enough to make your stomach drop. You light the lamp early, its steady beam cutting through sheets of water like a sword. You grip the railing, knuckles white, marveling at the chaos. There's a strange beauty in it, though. The waves glow under the lightning, frothing like boiling silver. The air smells like ozone and brine. You shout into the wind just to hear your own voice torn away. It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. And somewhere deep down, you realize, this is why you're here. To stand in the teeth of storms and keep the light alive. Hours later, when the thunder softens and the rain fades into drizzle, the tower feels exhausted. You feel exhausted. You collapse into your cot, clothes still damp, ears ringing. Tomorrow there will be damage to assess, fallen shutters, broken railings, maybe another dent in your fragile sanity. But for now, you let the tower cradle you, its stones humming with the memory of thunder. And you drift, not into dreams of beans or potatoes, but into visions of light sweeping across an endless, storm-tossed sea. Morning doesn't exactly greet you with warmth. Instead, it sneaks in through the cracks of the shutter, a pale gray that suggests the storm has spent itself but left the sky bruised and moody. You sit up slowly, every muscle reminding you of yesterday's battle with rust, ropes, and rain. Your back feels like it's been used as a test site for an experimental mattress made entirely of bricks. But hey, that's lighthouse luxury. You pull on boots still damp from yesterday, which is like plunging your feet into two cold, briny puddles. Charming. The gulls are already screaming overhead, undeterred by the storm, their voices hoarse but triumphant, as if mocking you for thinking a little thunder might quiet them. You mutter back, "I survived too, you feathered maniacs," and begin your morning round. The first chore is obvious: storm cleanup. The tower groans like an old man when you push open the heavy door, and you step outside into the aftermath. Debris is scattered everywhere, splintered driftwood, twisted ropes, seaweed plastered against walls like some avant-garde decorator's idea of wallpaper. One shutter has torn clean off and is wedged between rocks. You make a note to salvage it later, because replacement parts don't exactly arrive by Amazon Prime out here. As you pace the grounds, you remember a historical tidbit. After particularly violent storms, some keepers reported finding half-drowned sheep, cows, even entire small boats washed up at the base of their lighthouses. Imagine starting your day by untangling a soggy cow from the rocks. You only have seaweed to deal with, and for that you count your blessings. The next task is to check the lamp mechanism. You climb the spiral stairs, legs dragging, and examine the massive Fresnel lens. It's streaked with condensation but otherwise intact. You run a cloth across the prisms until they gleam again. The lens itself is one of the marvels of the 19th century, designed with concentric glass rings to bend and amplify light far beyond what a naked flame could manage. In fact, one of these things could make a candle shine like a small sun. Historians still argue whether the first mariners who saw a Fresnel lens thought it was science or sorcery. You lean toward sorcery, because frankly, it looks too clever to be otherwise. Midday creeps up as you continue patching minor damage. Your stomach reminds you that it's been running on fumes. You trudge back inside and prepare what could generously be called lunch, hardtack softened in weak tea. The stuff tastes like drywall dipped in disappointment, but it fills the gap. You once read about keepers experimenting with frying hardtack in oil to make it more palatable, like a proto-potato chip. A quirky tidbit, but alas, you have no oil to spare. You crunch through the plain version, consoling yourself that sailors across the world were suffering the same culinary injustice. After lunch comes rope work. You drag the shutter free from its rocky prison and attempt to lash it back into place. It's a comedy of errors, ropes slipping, knots refusing to cooperate, and the wind tugging at the wood as though it wants custody rights. You curse under your breath, though not too loudly. You're convinced the gulls thrive on your frustration. Eventually, the shutter is secured, if a little crooked. You decide it gives the tower character. Later in the afternoon, you take a walk down to the tide pools, partly to inspect the coastline for damage, partly because you need a mental break. The pools glitter in the muted light, little worlds of their own. Starfish cling to rocks, tiny crabs scuttle sideways like nervous waiters, and sea anemones wave their tentacles lazily. You crouch and watch them, mesmerized by the alien simplicity of their lives. No lanterns to polish, no ropes to tie, no beans to choke down. Just wait for the tide, eat what drifts in, repeat. There's a kind of envy there. You skim a flat stone across the pool. It skips 3 times before sinking. Not bad, you think. Then you recall a fringe tidbit. Some board keepers once held official stone skipping competitions during their long stretches of isolation. One account mentions a record of 32 skips across a calm cove. 32! You can barely manage 3. You briefly debate practicing until you improve, but then realize you'd probably just invent a new shoulder injury, and nobody would come out here to treat it. The sky begins to brighten as the afternoon wanes. Patches of blue appear between the ragged clouds. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. The storm's gone, really gone, and the sea looks calmer, almost forgiving. You take that as a cue to tidy up the journal. You document the storm's duration, wind speed, and the small damages. Severe squall, shutter lost, minor flooding at base. You're tempted to add, nearly lost my sanity, being still terrible, but you restrain yourself. Future historians don't need every detail. By evening, the exhaustion catches up. Your hands are raw from rope and brine, your body sore from hauling and climbing. You light the lamp again, watching its beam sweep across the water. Tonight, the sea seems to listen, lying quiet beneath the rhythm of light and dark, light and dark. You lean against the railing, content for the moment. You can almost imagine sailors out there, spotting the steady flash, relieved to know they're near land. They'll never know your name, never picture you swearing at crooked shutters or making friends with tide pool crabs. But they'll trust that light, and that's enough. You smile, the kind of tired smile that only shows up after weathering a storm and surviving on crumbs. When you finally collapse into bed, the tower creaks softly around you, no longer straining, just breathing. Like it, you're battered but still upright. Tomorrow will bring new chores, new goals, new beans. But for tonight, you drift into sleep with the rhythm of waves against stone, the ocean's lullaby, reminding you that in the grand scheme, your unremarkable lighthouse life is exactly remarkable enough. You wake to a calmness that feels almost suspicious, like when a toddler gets quiet in the other room and you just know something catastrophic is happening. The storm has passed, the sea has flattened into a dull silver, and the gulls are oddly subdued. Either they're exhausted or plotting. You decide not to press your luck. The first thing you do, because you've learned, is climb the tower to check the lantern. The glass still bears streaks from last night's condensation, but the mechanism turns smoothly. You give the brass fittings a quick polish until they gleam. The Fresnel lens catches the morning sun and flings rainbow shards across the walls, as if mocking you for thinking it was ever dirty. You mutter, "You're welcome," like the thankless roommate it is. Down below, the air is damp, carrying the scent of kelp and salt that clings to everything, including your clothes, bedding, and probably your very soul. It's laundry day. Not glamorous, but critical. You drag out a bucket, soap, and a bundle of foul-smelling linens that could probably walk away on their own if given the chance. Laundry here isn't just dunk and rub. It's an ordeal of scrubbing until your knuckles redden, then wringing out water until your arms feel like jelly. You hang the linens on a line stretched between two posts, praying the wind behaves. More than one keeper has written of entire wardrobes vanishing into the ocean with a sudden gust. Historians still argue whether these losses counted as occupational hazards or just nature's wardrobe edits. While you wrestle the sheets, your mind drifts to the strangest part of laundry duty, the drying. It takes forever in this moist, sea-soaked climate. Some keepers claim they drape clothes over lantern room railings, letting the warmth from the lamp speed the process. Quirky, sure, but you can see the appeal. You briefly imagine explaining to a passing sailor why your undergarments are fluttering from the lighthouse top like surrender flags. Maybe not. By midday, your arms ache, your hands are pruny, and you've convinced yourself that laundry is some form of maritime penance. To reward yourself, you prepare lunch, a thrilling upgrade from yesterday's hardtack. Today it's beans. Yes, beans again. But with a tiny pinch of dried onion you unearth from the stores, it almost passes as flavorful. You chew thoughtfully, staring out the window, And think about how entire maritime histories were fueled by food this boring. British sailors had peas pudding, Americans had salted pork that doubled as dental challenges, and you have beans. Comfortingly consistent. Afternoon brings repair work. You notice one of the iron railings on the lantern gallery is loose, so you fetch tools and tighten bolts, muttering at the stubborn metal. The salt air has gnawed at everything. Rust is your eternal nemesis. You chip at it with a file, flakes showering like reddish snow. Once, you read about a keeper who claimed rust was alive, slowly eating its way through lighthouses like a parasite. Sounds absurd, but staring at the pitted railing, you can't help thinking he wasn't entirely wrong. Taking a break, you wander down to the edge of the rocks. The tide is low, exposing slick seaweed and barnacle-crusted stones. You hop carefully from one rock to another, scanning for anything interesting washed ashore. Sometimes storms deposit treasure, barrels of fruit, wooden crates, even exotic trinkets. Today, nothing but tangled ropes and half a lobster shell. Still, you pocket a smooth piece of driftwood, planning to carve it later. Some keepers whittle miniature ships, others carve chess pieces. You figure you'll just attempt a spoon. That's ambitious enough. The silence out here is profound. With no storm, no crashing waves, the world shrinks to gull cries, the drip of water, and the occasional creak of stone contracting in the sun. You pause, realizing how rare true silence is in the modern world. Out here, it's not peaceful, it's almost intimidating. Like the ocean is watching, waiting for its next move. You shake off the thought and return to the tower. Evening comes quietly. You climb once more to light the lamp. The mechanism clicks into motion, the lens begins its slow, measured rotation, and the beam stretches into the horizon like an extended hand. You lean against the railing, feeling the chill creep back into the air. In moments like this, you think of the strange duality of your life, invisible, yet indispensable. The ships passing far out to sea will never know you exist. They'll never see your crookedly repaired shutter or your bean-stained cooking pot. But without your steady routine, laundry, lamp tending, endless polishing, they might smash against these rocks and vanish. A life of tedium, yes, but one with invisible weight. You scribble in the journal before bed, weather calm, laundry successful, beans edible. It sounds ridiculous when reduced to words, but that's the essence of your unremarkable keeper's life. And as you lie down, sheets still faintly damp, the waves lap against stone in a rhythm that feels almost like reassurance. You survived the storm, survived the chores, survived another round of beans. Tomorrow will bring the same cycle, but for now, you sink into the soft gray blur of sleep. Morning greets you with an almost theatrical fog, thick enough that if you stretch your arm out in front of your face, you half expect it to vanish into another dimension. The lighthouse tower looms above you as nothing more than a pale silhouette, the lamp hidden, muffled, smothered by this gray curtain. And yet, this is when the lighthouse matters most. A bright beam in clear weather is like a flashlight at noon, impressive, but unnecessary. In fog, the light becomes salvation. You climb the spiral stairs, boots tapping against the worn stone, and when you reach the lantern room, you peer outward. Nothing. Just a blank wall of gray that seems to press its damp weight against the glass. You light the lamp anyway, watching its golden glow cut into the void. Does it reach the sea? You'll never know. It feels like shining a flashlight into a pillow. Still, the ritual is the point. Mariners count on this glow whether they can see it or not. Fog brings its own soundtrack, a muffled quiet, punctuated by the occasional boom of waves and the eerie wail of a foghorn. Not all lighthouses had them in the early 19th century, but here you improvise, striking a heavy iron gong kept near the gallery. The sound rolls outward into the mist like a groaning giant. Somewhere out at sea, a captain might catch that sound and steer wide of the rocks. Somewhere else, a sailor might mutter about how every foghorn sounds like his mother-in-law. You descend again, settling into chores that require more patience than skill. You polish brass, though you did the same yesterday. Brass never stops demanding attention. The faintest smudge, the smallest tarnish, and suddenly the lighthouse looks like it's been abandoned for decades. You also oil the gears of the rotation mechanism, listening to their faint ticking rhythm. The machinery is almost alive in its persistence, like a mechanical heartbeat keeping pace with the sea. The fog changes your meals too. Cooking is harder when the air is damp and heavy. Matches refuse to catch, smoke clings instead of rising, and your stew tastes faintly of must. You hunch over the pot anyway, stirring carefully, trying not to let the condensation dripping from the ceiling plop into your food. Quirky, yes, but many keepers wrote of this exact misery, fog as a condiment nobody ordered. By midday, your clothes are wet from the knees down just from walking through the mist outside. You wipe your brow, though the air is so clammy that your skin never truly dries. Even paper curls and softens, so when you open the logbook, the ink feathers on the page. You scrawl anyway, fog thick, visibility nil, lamp burning. Later, you venture to the rocks again, though cautiously. Fog distorts everything. You hear gulls, but they sound closer than they are. You hear waves, but can't see where the edge begins. It's like moving through a dream where distances mean nothing. Historians still argue whether fog truly disoriented sailors or if it was mostly human nerves amplifying ordinary risks. Standing here, you lean toward the first theory. It feels as though the world itself has dissolved. And yet, in this soft disorientation, you notice details normally missed. Droplets beat along every spiderweb strung across the railings, turning them into jeweled chains. Seaweed clings to rocks, its fronds trembling with each surge of unseen water. Even the gulls, vague shapes overhead, seem less obnoxious in this muffled soundscape. For once, their cries don't stab your eardrums, they drift like echoes. As dusk arrives, the fog doesn't lift. The lamp glows like a weak candle in milk. You strike the iron gong again, its reverberations vibrating your ribs. You imagine sailors clutching their wheels, trying to catch both sound and light, thankful for a keeper they'll never meet. You take small pride in that, though you also note that if this fog keeps up, your laundry will never dry and you'll smell like a kelp forest for weeks. Balance in all things. Night closes in, and with it a peculiar silence. The fog swallows every sound except your own breathing and the faint hiss of the lamp. You sit by the window, journal in your lap, and scribble, the world erased. Only lamp remains. The sentence looks pretentious enough to make you chuckle. If future historians ever find your log, they'll probably debate whether you were a poet or just sleep-deprived. You crawl into bed with the damp fog pressing even through the shutters, and though the sheets cling clammy against your skin, your mind drifts off. The tower hums faintly above, the foghorn waits beside the rail, and out there in the hidden dark, ships glide cautiously onward, never knowing your name. Morning again, and this time the fog has retreated like a bashful guest, leaving the air startlingly clear, sharp enough to make you squint. The sea sparkles as if someone spilled an entire crate of diamonds across it, and gulls wheel in crisp arcs, their wings slicing the sky instead of dissolving into gray. The sudden visibility makes you realize how much you've been leaning on sound and instinct the past few days. Without fog, you can actually see what you're supposed to be guarding. Ships appear now, first as pinpricks, then as proper silhouettes with masts rising like skeletal fingers. They move steadily, sails swelling, hulls gliding with deceptive grace. From your vantage point, they look like toys drifting across a giant basin. But you know better. Those little silhouettes carry men who haven't seen land in weeks, barrels of salted beef, letters sealed with wax, crates of porcelain. You lean against the railing, shading your eyes, and feel oddly protective, like a host making sure guests reach the party without tripping on the doorstep. When the sea lanes are busy, the logbook grows fat with entries: brigantine eastbound, noon. Schooner passing close, 2 bells. You jot them down as though your life depends on it, though in truth the log is mostly for bureaucrats who'll skim it once a year. Still, it has the effect of making you notice every detail. Was the schooner painted black or green? Did it carry 2 jibs or 3? Was there a flag fluttering that might suggest its port of origin? You become both board clerk and amateur detective in the same breath. Sometimes, a ship passes so near you can hear the shouts of sailors, though their words are usually lost to the wind. Occasionally, a voice will carry clearly, calling something like, "All's well, keeper," or more cheekily, "Got any tea up there?" You're tempted to shout back, but rules frown on keepers drawing attention. It feels silly, though, to be mute while men wave from only 100 yards away. You content yourself with lifting a hand in a small, almost invisible salute. Of course, the sea isn't always friendly. You recall one frigate gliding dangerously close, its prow threatening the hidden shoals beneath. You rang the bell furiously, light already blazing, and after a tense pause, the ship shifted course with sails snapping. Maybe they'd seen you, maybe not. Historians still argue whether keepers' signals were decisive in avoiding wrecks or whether experienced captains would have navigated successfully anyway. You, for one, vote for the keeper's side. After all, you're the one clanging bells like a maniac while captains are probably distracted with rum rations. The strange part about this work is that you never meet the men you save. Ships glide past, vanish into the horizon, and that's the end of it. No thank you notes, no grateful handshakes, just the knowledge that lives continued because your lamp spun faithfully in the night. It's the kind of anonymous heroism that feels noble on good days and pointless on others. You once joked to yourself that lighthouse keepers are like the world's worst customer service reps. Nobody calls unless something goes horribly wrong. With clear weather, your chores expand. Paint flakes faster under bright sun, so you scrape, sand, and repaint the iron railings, balancing precariously above the rocks. You wipe salt spray from windows, though by the time you finish, new spray has already landed. The cycle feels ridiculous, like brushing your teeth while eating chocolate. Yet each repetition builds into a rhythm that keeps your mind from rusting as fast as the metal. On days like this, you're reminded of how stunning the sea can be. The horizon line sharpens, the sky deepens into an impossible blue, and the whole world feels endless. You lean against the warm stone of the tower, half drowsy, and allow yourself the dangerous luxury of daydreaming. Maybe you're on one of those ships, maybe you're heading to some exotic port, maybe you're not stuck here with seagulls as your main social circle. Then you remember that you're prone to seasickness and laugh at yourself. A daydreaming sailor wouldn't last past the first swell. As evening descends, the traffic continues. Ships glow faintly against the twilight, their lanterns flickering like fireflies. You watch them vanish into the dark one by one, and the responsibility returns like a heavy coat. You're the line between their safe passage and disaster. The lamp is trimmed, the lens gleams, and the mechanism ticks with patient steadiness. You linger by the window, gaze outward, and whisper something nobody will hear: "Safe voyage." Later, in your cramped bunk, you think about how small you are compared to the ocean. One human, a single flame, a tower of stone, but somehow, the whole maritime world depends on this little triad. You imagine a sailor far out there glancing at your light and relaxing his shoulders because he knows where he is. That thought comforts you enough to drift to sleep, while the sea murmurs its endless lullaby against the rocks below. Dawn slides in pink and orange, spilling through the lantern room glass until every surface gleams like it's been polished overnight. You rub sleep from your eyes and remember, not for the first time, that a lighthouse never really rests, it just cycles between stages of glow. You climb the spiral staircase with a bucket, because today is not glamorous. Today is oil lamp day, and you know the work by heart. Trim the wick, scrape the crusted soot, polish until the brass shines like a vanity project. There's a reason lighthouses were never entrusted to the lazy. If you neglect the lamp for even a night, the flame will sputter, the glass will haze, and ships will be left guessing in the dark. Mainstream history tells us that by the 1820s, whale oil was the gold standard fuel for lamps, prized for its bright, steady burn. And yes, that meant entire fleets hunted whales with an intensity that would make modern activists faint. You could almost hear the creak of those ships in your head, entire industries built on rendering giant mammals into lantern juice. Cheery thought for your morning coffee. But then there's the quirky reality you face: whale oil doesn't smell great. In fact, it smells like someone fried fish and forgot to open the window. Add in soot and a warm lantern room, and congratulations, you've got the 19th century equivalent of living next to a questionable street food cart. So you keep the windows cracked when possible, though sea air just adds another layer of salt. Nothing like the fine aroma of burnt fish candle with ocean undertones to spice up your day. You kneel by the burner, trimming the wick with a practiced snip. The charred bits fall like brittle feathers into your palm. Each movement is careful, because too much wick means a smoky, uneven flame, and too little wick means a weak, apologetic glow. You'd think keeping a fire alive would be simple. After all, humans have been doing it since caves, but add bureaucracy, sailors' lives, and daily reports, and suddenly it's a balancing act worthy of a circus juggler. As you polish the brass fittings, you catch your own reflection in the gleam. For a moment, you look more official than you feel, like a soldier tending his rifle. Historians still argue whether the lamp was the true heart of the lighthouse or whether the keeper's discipline mattered more. You, rubbing smudges off your nose, would argue they're inseparable. Lamp and keeper are partners, like a fiddler and his bow. Without one, the other is just decoration. Of course, while whale oil was standard, other fuels popped up like eccentric cousins. There were trials with colza oil, rapeseed, which burned clean but was finicky in cold weather. Some keepers swore by it, others cursed it for clogging wicks. And by the late 19th century, kerosene started sneaking into the game, cheaper and easier to transport. You picture future keepers laughing at your fish-scented routine while they pour neat kerosene and call it progress. Quirky side note, some coastal towns even tried burning pine resin in smaller lamps, a sticky experiment that often ended with the lamp room smelling like a Christmas tree on fire. After hours of fiddling, the lamp sparkles and the reflectors shine like golden halos. You step back, wipe sweat with your sleeve, and imagine the light tonight cutting clean across the waves. The satisfaction is quiet but real, an invisible contract kept. Ships won't cheer you for it, but you'll know the flame won't betray you. The rest of the day stretches with smaller tasks, carrying oil up in heavy cans, because naturally, the lamp is at the top of the tallest tower, cleaning smudges from the glass panes, checking the clockwork that turns the lens. Each crank and pulley has to run smooth, or else your light will stutter like a nervous heartbeat. You grease gears, tap gently with a mallet, and pray you're more mechanic than menace. At night, when the lamp finally blazes, the whole room transforms. The lens magnifies the flame into a dazzling beam, spinning in slow, majestic sweeps. You lean close, mesmerized, though careful not to scorch your eyelashes. Out at sea, that light stretches 20 miles, a sword of fire cutting darkness. You almost laugh, realizing you're basically a glorified janitor of a single flame, yet without that janitor, no sword. As you descend the spiral steps, the lamp ticking steadily above, you imagine a sailor somewhere glancing toward shore, seeing your beam sweep across the horizon, and silently recalculating his course. He'll never know your name, never picture you scraping soot with stiff fingers, but he'll trust you. That's the real contract, the anonymous handshake between land and sea, sealed by oil and fire. You stretch on your cot later, hands still smelling of brass polish, and let the hum of the lantern mechanism soothe you. Funny how something so mechanical can sound like a lullaby. Outside, waves slap the rocks, gulls settle into crevices, and above it all, your little flame keeps sweeping. You close your eyes, whisper a quick hope that the wick holds steady, and surrender to the kind of sleep only earned by someone who's been elbow-deep in soot all day. The sea has moods, and you've come to recognize them as clearly as the expressions on an old friend's face. Sometimes it's glassy and calm, stretching out smooth as a lazy cat. Other times it growls, frothy and restless, hurling waves like it's trying to evict you from your cliffside tower. Today, it chooses somewhere in between, a rolling swell, enough to keep you cautious but not enough to send you clinging to the banisters. You carry your logbook to the gallery walk outside the lantern room and let the wind whip through your hair, scribbling notes while gulls scream their own editorial comments overhead. Every keeper keeps a log, though whether anyone besides the next inspector ever reads it is questionable. You jot down the date, the temperature, the wind direction, and the height of waves as best you can eyeball it. Some keepers get poetic, writing of clouds like bruises or the sea weeping. You're more the practical type, wind strong, waves messy, gulls irritating. Still, a century from now some historian might pore over your words, debating whether the day was indeed messy or whether you were just in a mood. Mainstream fact, the 19th century was an age obsessed with measuring nature. Meteorological societies sprang up, governments handed out rain gauges, and men in frock coats argued over barometric readings with the same fervor as sports fans today debate statistics. Lighthouses became unintentional weather stations, because we're better to record wind and wave than write we're both slam artists. Your logbook isn't just busy work, it's part of a continental data set, even if you don't quite buy the importance when your ink smudges and sea spray. Of course, keepers weren't always the most reliable scientists. Quirky tidbit, one Irish keeper allegedly doodled elaborate ships in his log margins instead of writing cloud cover, and another used his to record every time his cat misbehaved. You've been tempted. Yesterday you nearly drew a caricature of the inspector with his ridiculous stovepipe hat. Instead, you reined it in with a respectable note about barometer readings. Still, the urge lingers. You step inside, shaking salt water off the book, and check your barometer mounted on the wall. The needle trembles slightly lower than yesterday, hinting at weather brewing. You frown, scribble falling pressure, and glance out the narrow window. Sure enough, darker clouds mass on the horizon, heavy as bruises. Historians still argue whether lighthouse logbooks were more about discipline, forcing keepers into routine, or genuine science. You lean toward the first. The science might help society, sure, but for you, the daily ritual is what keeps you tethered when days stretch into sameness. You flip back through earlier entries, smiling at your own shorthand, dogfish in shallows again, lantern spotless, fog threatening like soup. The pages become a diary, though you'd never admit that aloud. A keeper isn't supposed to need confession, you're meant to be stoic as the tower itself. Yet there it is in ink, loneliness smuggled in under the guise of wind speed, hope disguised as tide notes. The logbook, plain as it looks, is as much companion as record. You make your way down to the storeroom where the tide chart hangs, pinned with brass tacks. The predictability of tides comforts you. Twice a day, the sea inhales and exhales, no matter how wild the weather above. You mark today's high tide with a small chalk circle, a little anchor for your brain. People ashore talk of hours and calendars. Out here, it's tides and pressure that tell your time. Later, over a lunch of stale bread dunked in tea, culinary highlight of the week, if you squint, you hear the first thump of bigger waves hitting the rocks. The log says pressure falling, and the world seems intent on proving you right. You chew slowly, watching through the window as spray arcs higher with each surge. Somewhere in your notes, the inspector will want to see neat tables of wind direction. You wonder if he'd prefer wind howled like an angry organ pipe. Probably not. By evening, the storm proves itself. Clouds march in, rain whips sideways, and the tower shudders like an old man's bones. You climb to the lantern room anyway, clutching the rail, recording every gust in cramped handwriting. The flame inside burns steady, a small miracle against the chaos outside. You mutter aloud, "Steady, girl," as if the lamp were a horse, and continue your notes with shaking hands, storm worsening, flame strong. The storm rattles long past midnight, so your logbook entry stretches like a teenager's essay, padding where it doesn't need to. Waves high. Still high. Very high. You laugh softly at your own uselessness. The lamp continues its sweep, the rain drums a relentless tattoo, and the tower creaks like a ship at anchor. You glance again at your log and add, morale low, but biscuits eaten. That one you'll probably erase tomorrow, but tonight it feels honest. By dawn, the storm relents, leaving seaweed draped like decorations on rocks and gulls sulking with damp wings. You close the logbook with a sigh, tucking the storm entry among the others. It feels like filing away evidence of survival. Tomorrow the sea might smile again, and you'll dutifully write calm. But you'll know that tucked between neat lines is a night when the tower groaned and you stood by your lamp, scribbling proof that you both endured. The sea is calm again, deceptively so, and the morning light throws everything into sharp relief. The rocks glisten, the grass clings to droplets like tiny pearls, and the horizon gleams too straight to trust. You stand on the gallery, leaning against the cold iron railing, and the stillness feels almost smug, as though the ocean is pretending yesterday's tantrum never happened. You know better. You've seen enough storms vanish into serenity to recognize this pattern, wild rage followed by suspicious calm. It's the pendulum of lighthouse life, and you ride it whether you want to or not. Today is cleaning day. To be fair, every day is cleaning day. But today you have no excuse to put it off, so you gather your bucket, your rags, and that infamous bottle of whale oil polish that smells faintly of old candles and regret. The tower waits for you like a cathedral of dust, each step spiraling upward with a faint crunch underfoot. Some keepers joke that lighthouses are mostly about sweeping spirals, sweeping light, sweeping stairs, sweeping dust. You've come to agree. Mainstream historical fact, lighthouse boards in the 19th century issued incredibly detailed cleaning instructions, down to the number of strokes required on brass fittings. Inspectors could dock pay if they found smudges on a lantern lens or rust on an iron hinge. Some even carried white gloves to swipe across surfaces like theatrical villains at an opera. You once heard of a keeper dismissed because his stairs had spider webs, never mind that the lantern never failed. The bureaucracy of light was as bright as the flame itself. You drag a rag across the brass railing of the lantern room, watching the metal emerge like gold teeth from grime. The rhythm is hypnotic. Rub, breathe, rub again. You try not to think about how this gleaming is mostly for show. No sailor on the dark water cares whether the railing shines. What they want is the light, steady, strong, unblinking. But inspectors, well, they want the shine. Historians still argue whether the obsession with spotless brass was a symptom of Victorian neatness or just a convenient excuse to remind keepers who was boss. Quirky tidbit: one eccentric keeper in Maine supposedly polished the brass so obsessively that he stripped it down to thin sheets, and his replacement had to cover the railings in protective paint. You chuckle at the thought while working on your own rail. Yours still feels sturdy, solid enough to lean on when the wind howls, though you'd never tell the inspector about the one spot that squeaks like a guilty conscience. You move downward, cloth in hand, tracing the curve of the stairs. Dust clings to the rag, smearing your palms gray. The stairwell echoes with your footsteps, a hollow rhythm that makes you think of organs in chapels. Each sweep feels like prayer, tedious, repetitive, but strangely grounding. Out here, surrounded by water, dust feels almost miraculous, a sign that something other than sea spray has settled inside your world. By midday, your back aches and your knees have mutinied, so you retreat to the keeper's quarters, bucket sloshing, and set about scrubbing the windows. The panes tilt toward the sea, catching light in uneven patterns. You remember when they first arrived, crated and wrapped, each one more precious than it looked. Back then, window glass was a luxury. People inland were still patching barns with grease paper or mica. You grin, imagining them envying your salt-streaked view, though they might change their minds if they spent one winter shivering behind it. As the day stretches, you begin the most dreaded task, cleaning the lens itself. The Fresnel, that great glass beehive, looms like a fragile monster in the lantern room. Each prism must be wiped gently, as though it were a child's cheek. The rules are clear: no scratching, no streaking, no shortcuts. You breathe on the glass, then wipe with a soft cloth, moving in tiny circles. The prisms catch your reflection in distorted fragments, one eye here, half a nose there. You look like a ghost broken into shards. You wonder how many sailors tonight will see those shards reassembled as a single steady beam, guiding them home. It's strange, this illusion, that your endless scrubbing translates into safety for someone you'll never meet. You pause, rag in hand, and rest your forehead briefly against the cool glass. A gull screams outside, reminding you that the world spins whether you polish or not. Still, you go back to work. By evening, the tower gleams unnaturally, like it's been dipped in a giant soap bubble. You descend the last steps, rag trailing from your fingers, and collapse into your chair. The smell of whale oil clings to your sleeves, a faint reminder of the day's labor. You laugh softly, remembering that some keepers used to rub whale oil on their boots to waterproof them, only to discover it made dogs chase them through town. Practical? Maybe. Embarrassing? Definitely. Dinner is leftover stew, reheated over the stove. You eat slowly, looking around at the freshly scrubbed room. The brass lamp beside you shines so brightly it reflects the spoon halfway to your mouth. For a fleeting second, you imagine an inspector bursting in, gloves ready, and finding nothing to criticize. The thought is almost intoxicating. Not because you crave his approval, but because for once you'd like to feel the tower is enough, clean enough, bright enough, steady enough. You write a final line in your logbook, all cleaned. Tower shines. Arms ache. Then you blow out the lamp, climb into bed, and let the sound of waves soothe the soreness from your muscles. Tomorrow, dust will creep back in, gulls will leave their gifts on the railing, and the cycle will begin again. But tonight, just for now, the lighthouse sparkles, and you allow yourself the small luxury of pride. You wake before dawn, joints still stiff from yesterday's marathon cleaning, and the first thing you notice is the silence. Not the absence of sound, there's always something humming, crashing, or moaning in the lighthouse, but the particular kind of quiet that means the wind has died, and the sea is, at least for now, holding its breath. You savor it like the pause between heartbeats. No rattling shutters, no roaring breakers. Just the muted hiss of the tide nudging rocks, and the creak of timbers shifting under your feet. The morning routine is simple but unavoidable. Check the lamp, log the night's weather, and make sure no one, meaning you, accidentally let the flame gutter. You trudge up the spiral, lantern still faintly warm from its night vigil. You note with quiet satisfaction that the wick burned evenly, no soot smearing the inside of the chimney. You log it in careful script: clear night. Steady flame. No incidents. The words might look boring, but they're the pulse of the lighthouse, as dependable as the sea is not. Mainstream historical fact: in the 19th century, lighthouse keepers were required to maintain meticulous logbooks. Inspectors reviewed them line by line, and any missed entry could mean a reprimand or worse. Some keepers turned the duty into a kind of personal diary, filling margins with sketches of birds or notes about passing ships. Others kept it dry as toast, every page an unbroken chain of wind moderate, lamplit. You fall somewhere in between, your pages tidy, but with the occasional wandering thought about clouds shaped like dragons. You descend again, craving warmth, and put the kettle on. Breakfast is the usual: bread if you have it, porridge if you don't. Today it's porridge, thick and lumpy, but a pinch of salt rescues it. You eat by the window, staring at the horizon like it owes you answers. Out there, a cargo schooner crawls past, sails sagging in the still air. You raise your spoon in mock salute. They'll never see you, but you imagine their captain, pipe clenched in his teeth, grateful that your lamp shone steady through the night. Halfway through your meal, a thump jolts the silence. You freeze, spoon hovering. Another thump, followed by a dragging sound. Your first thought: shipwreck. Your second: probably just a seal. You grab your coat and step outside into the chill dawn. Sure enough, sprawled across the slick rocks near the tower base, a seal blinks up at you with the expression of someone who's just woken up in the wrong bed. Quirky tidbit: some lighthouse keepers kept seals, gulls, or even goats as unofficial mascots. One famously trained his goat to haul water buckets up the stairs, which sounds efficient until you imagine the hoof marks on the steps. You're not about to adopt this particular seal, but you do toss it a fish scrap from last night's stew. It accepts with an indignant snort, then flops back toward the tide, leaving behind the smell of wet dog mixed with brine. You return indoors, shaking off the damp, and glance at the small pile of letters on the table. Yesterday's supply boat brought them, and though you've already skimmed them, you can't resist one more read. A cousin writes about a barn raising. A neighbor from years ago mentions a county fair, with newfangled mechanical rides that sound equal parts thrilling and dangerous. And there's the official letter, thick with stamps and seals, reminding you, politely, but firmly, that next month's inspection is due. The inspector will want polished brass, spotless windows, and perfectly neat logs. You sigh. So much for yesterday's pride in your clean tower. Dust doesn't take holidays. You spend the late morning repairing small things, tightening a hinge on the oil shed, patching a loose board on the dock, and checking the rainwater cistern. Lighthouse life is mostly waiting, punctuated by maintenance. You do what you can, but the sea always wins in the long run. Salt eats metal, wind shreds wood, gulls chew on anything. You half joke in your mind that if you left for a week, the lighthouse would collapse into driftwood and seaweed out of sheer spite. By afternoon, clouds gather, slow and heavy, like a curtain being drawn. You feel the air thicken, dampness wrapping around you until your shirt sticks. The storm doesn't break, not yet, it just waits, biding its time. Historians still argue whether 19th century keepers became uncanny forecasters of weather because of keen observation or simply because when you live in a tower surrounded by water, your life depends on guessing correctly. You lean toward the latter. After all, you've learned the hard way that red sky at night isn't always as reliable as the proverb promises. You haul extra coal inside, check the shutters, and tie down anything light enough to blow away. Then you settle at the desk, logbook open, and sketch the darkening sky in the margin. Maybe no inspector will care, but future you might. The gulls circle higher than usual, shrieking like unpaid creditors. Even the seal from earlier has vanished, probably into some sheltered cove. Evening falls before the storm breaks. You light the lamp early, flame flickering nervously, and climb to the gallery to watch. The first drops splatter fat and cold against your face. The sea below churns into froth, and the schooner you saluted earlier is nowhere in sight, hopefully tucked safely in a harbor. The storm hits with a sudden roar, slamming rain sideways against the glass. You retreat into the lantern room, soaked and exhilarated. There's a strange comfort in storms when you're inside the tower. Yes, the wind howls, the stones groan, and you half expect the whole structure to sway like a drunk sailor, but there's also the reassurance that this is exactly what the lighthouse was built for. You are, in a small way, at the calm heart of chaos. You check the flame again, tighten the vents, and watch the great Fresnel throw steady light across a sea that looks ready to swallow the world. Downstairs, after hours of storm watching, you heat the rest of the porridge for supper. You eat slowly, spoon clicking against the bowl in time with the rain drumming the windows. Somewhere out there, in that furious blackness, sailors are squinting through sheets of rain, grateful for the glimpse of your light. You imagine their curses, their wet boots, their freezing fingers on ropes, and you raise your bowl in a small, private toast, here's to making it through. When you finally lie down, the storm still rages, but exhaustion drags you into sleep. Your last thought is simple: storms pass, seas calm, but the light must never falter. And you, however ordinary your days may seem, are the one holding it steady. You wake to a silence so complete it feels staged, like the aftermath of a stagehand dropping a curtain and holding the audience's breath. The storm spent itself in the night, and now the world looks scrubbed clean. The sea glitters under a weak but stubborn morning sun, waves rolling with the exhaustion of a fighter who's finally sat down. You shuffle to the window, mug of yesterday's reboiled tea in hand, and watch gulls dive at the fresh debris. Broken branches, clumps of seaweed, and, always unsettling, bits of wood that look suspiciously like shipwreck remnants. It's part of the job, waiting to see what the storm leaves behind. You pull on boots still damp from yesterday, step outside, and start your cautious walk down to the rocky shoreline. The air is sharp with salt and wet stone, and your breath clouds in front of you. The tide's already tugging away some of the wreckage, but enough remains to tell a story if you're willing to squint. A hatch cover. A single boot. A barrel split open, its contents long washed away. Mainstream historical fact: after major storms, lighthouse keepers often acted as the first responders, scanning beaches for survivors or salvage. Officially, salvage belonged to the government or the ship's owners, but unofficially, locals sometimes helped themselves to whatever washed ashore. You've heard stories of entire communities suddenly outfitted with found china sets or timber thanks to a conveniently timed wreck. You, however, are stuck with soggy boots and a barrel that smells like spoiled molasses. Lucky you. As you poke through the drift, something shiny catches your eye. A fragment of glass, green as a wine bottle, smoothed by waves. You slip it into your pocket. Not treasure, not even useful, but it feels like a keepsake, something to prove the storm really happened, something you can turn in your fingers on a duller day. The beach combing doesn't yield any living souls, which is good news in its own way. You glance around for signs of seals again, but even they seem scarce this morning, as though the whole coastline is taking a nap. You haul the salvage up higher, away from the tide's greedy fingers, just in case the supply boat takes an interest later. Then you trudge back toward the tower, already thinking about the inevitable repairs. By midday, you're knee-deep in the mess the storm left inside. Water seeped through the north window frame, leaving a puddle that smells faintly of mildew. A shutter banged itself half off its hinge, so you spend a good hour hammering it back into place, muttering words you wouldn't repeat in polite company. And the lantern gallery? Salt spray everywhere. You mop the glass until your arm feels like it's going to detach, knowing full well that tomorrow it'll be streaked again. Quirky tidbit: one keeper on the coast of Maine supposedly invented his own storm mop, a contraption made from whalebone and old sails, just to keep his lantern windows clear during gales. Did it work? No one can say, but the story persists, and you can't help but picture him proudly unveiling his mop like it was the crown jewels. You, less inventive, rely on elbow grease and foul muttering. By the time the tower feels halfway civilized again, your stomach reminds you it's well past lunch. You heat up beans and bread, eating slowly, still tired from the storm's adrenaline. As you chew, you glance at the logbook, still open where you left it. You dutifully write, storm ended near dawn. Heavy seas. No casualties cited. You consider adding a sketch of the glass shard but decide against it. Inspectors are many things, but they're rarely art critics. Afternoon brings a strange mix of laziness and duty. The sun tempts you to sit outside and let your bones soak warmth, but the checklist in your head nags louder. You haul more coal, re-oil the lamp mechanism, and, for reasons you can't explain, decide to sweep the entire staircase top to bottom. Maybe it's the aftermath of the storm, some primal need to reassert order, to prove that the sea hasn't taken everything. By the time you're finished, the steps gleam faintly in the filtered light. Historians still argue whether lighthouse life was primarily crushing monotony or quiet fulfillment. You find the answer slides depending on the day. This afternoon, with the sea glinting, the lamp polished, and the tower humming with its own kind of pride, you lean toward fulfillment. It's not glamorous, no, but it's steady, and that steadiness has its own beauty. Like a heartbeat. Like breathing. Late in the day, you allow yourself a rare indulgence, sitting on the gallery rail with your legs dangling dangerously, eating an apple. Below, the sea laps gentle as a cat. Above, clouds scatter like torn parchment. You catch yourself humming, a tune you can't quite place. Maybe a sailor's song you once overheard, maybe something you invented. Out here, the lines blur. No one's keeping score. Evening creeps on, stretching the shadows, cooling the stone. You light the lamp, flame steady under your practiced hands, and step back to admire the way the prisms catch fire. Out at the horizon, a brig sails eastward, its silhouette sharp against the fading light. For a moment, you imagine you're aboard her deck, boots braced, hair whipping in the wind, bound for places with names that roll off the tongue like promises. Then you blink, and you're back in the tower, porridge simmering, the lamp humming. Supper is uneventful, but you make it special by slicing the last of your cheese onto the bread. The smell is faintly alarming, but after weeks of repetition, it tastes like luxury. You laugh at yourself, a man in a tower, congratulating himself on moldy cheese like it's a banquet. You shake your head, but you also smile. By the time you crawl into bed, the sea has quieted to a lullaby rhythm, steady enough to trick you into thinking tomorrow will be simple. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But for tonight, with the storm behind you and the lamp blazing, you let yourself drift into sleep, trusting the tower to stay and watch as you dream. Morning comes with a pale wash of light across the sea, the kind that makes you squint and wonder if the sun is late or just lazy today. You stretch, hear your back pop like kindling, and shuffle toward the stairs. The night passed quietly, no banging shutters, no howling wind, and in a way, that's unsettling. After the storm's drama, this calm feels suspicious, like a prank waiting to spring. You step outside, and the air smells of wet rock and faint smoke drifting from some distant fishing hamlet. The tide has retreated, leaving behind tangles of seaweed that look like wigs abandoned after a costume party. You pick your way across the slick stones, half curious, half on autopilot. That's when you notice something odd. The beach is dotted with gulls, but instead of squabbling and screaming as usual, they stand in solemn rows, watching the waves. A court of birds, quiet and eerie. You mutter, "What are you plotting?" and one gull tilts its head at you like it knows something you don't. Your curiosity is rewarded, or punished, depending on how you frame it, by the unmistakable sight of a long plank washed up higher on the rocks. Not unusual after a storm, but this one carries a clue. Paint still clings to it, flaking but clear enough. A blue stripe, maybe part of a hull design. You run your fingers along it, the paint gritty under your skin. Somewhere out there, a vessel is lighter by at least one plank, and maybe far more. Mainstream historical fact, 19th century maritime records are filled with reports of ships damaged in storms that limped into port days later. Sometimes they survived with half their rigging gone, sometimes they didn't make it at all. You think of those records now, the neat handwriting listing names of ships you'll never see, cargoes you'll never touch, and lives that vanished into the tide. You jot a mental note, log the wreckage when you get back to the tower. But then you notice something else, a barrel wedged between rocks. You wade closer, boots squelching, and find it still sealed. Against your better judgment, you wrestle it free. The barrel sloshes, heavy with whatever cargo it once carried. Food? Liquor? Whale oil? Your mind leaps to wild possibilities, like the old tales of keepers stumbling upon barrels of rum. Quirky tidbit, one famously lucky keeper in Cornwall allegedly discovered a cask of brandy after a wreck and ended up the subject of gossip for years, half hero, half thief. You're no brandy pirate, but you can't help hoping. Back in the tower, you pry the barrel open with a crowbar and a prayer. Inside, salted fish. Not glamorous, but still edible if you can ignore the smell. You sigh, half relieved, half disappointed. At least your pantry just got a boost. You stash the fish in a corner, already imagining the monotonous dinners it will fuel. After the excitement, you settle into chores, scrubbing floors, checking the oil levels, sweeping away the grit the storm shoved in through every crack. The rhythm of work soothes you, like knitting order out of chaos. Yet your mind keeps returning to the plank with its painted stripe. What ship was it from? Was it limping towards safety, or has it already gone under? Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers were primarily passive caretakers or active investigators of maritime events. You find yourself leaning toward the latter. Out here, with the sea delivering clues to your doorstep, you can't help but become a detective of wreckage, piecing together puzzles no one else will solve. Afternoon slides in with a chill wind, and you decide to climb the gallery for a better look at the horizon. The sea is deceptively calm, almost smug in its stillness. Then you spot something, a faint smudge of sail far to the east. You watch, straining your eyes, as the vessel inches across the horizon. It looks intact, though from this distance you can't be sure. You whisper, "Good luck, stranger," knowing they can't hear you. Still, it feels right to say it. Later, you cook a supper of beans and the freshest of the fish, fresh being generous, given it was packed in salt before the storm even thought about forming. You chew slowly, grateful for variety if not flavor. A little joke sneaks into your head. Congratulations, you've invented the world's first fish-flavored salt block. You snort into your plate and nearly choke. As darkness falls, you trim the wick and light the lamp, the ritual as comforting as prayer. The prisms catch and scatter the flame, throwing it far into the night. You lean against the railing, listening to the slow hiss of the lamp and the steady crash of waves. The gulls are gone now, vanished into wherever gulls plot their mischief. Only the sea remains, tireless, patient, and unsentimental. When you finally crawl into bed, the day's questions drift with you. Whose ship left its plank behind? How many barrels still bob unseen in the water? What stories the sea is keeping to itself? You close your eyes, and the rhythm of waves pulls you under, carrying you toward tomorrow with the same inevitability it carries every ship, whether to safety or to silence. You wake to a draft crawling across the stone floor, the kind of chill that sneaks under blankets and convinces you someone left a door ajar. You groan, stretch, and rub your eyes until the blurred lines of the tower sharpen back into familiarity. The storm's chaos may have passed, but the tower carries its aftertaste. Salt grit crunches under your bare feet, and somewhere upstairs a shutter bangs lightly, as if still rehearsing yesterday's drama. Climbing to the lantern room with your morning stiffness, you check the glass panes. Most are intact, but one frame rattles when the wind nudges it. You make a mental note, repairs soon, before the next tantrum. Because, as you've learned, the sea never signs peace treaties, it just takes smoke breaks between fights. Breakfast is quick, bread that's half stale and tea strong enough to wake your ancestors. You chew slowly, staring out the narrow window. The horizon looks deceptively kind, but you've already fallen for that trick before. It's like a poker player who pretends to have a weak hand while hiding an ace. Then you notice something small and peculiar. On the ledge outside the window, tucked among the guano splatters left by your noisy neighbors, lies a feather. Not unusual, gulls molt like shedding machines, but this feather is longer, darker, more elegant than the usual white scraps. You step outside to retrieve it, holding it up to the light. Could be from a cormorant, or maybe even a raven carried in by the storm. Mainstream historical fact, 19th century lighthouse logs sometimes recorded unusual wildlife sightings after storms, when birds blown off course landed to rest. Some keepers even noted owls perching inside lantern rooms, staring at them like judgmental librarians. You can't shake the idea that your feather has blown in as a kind of calling card, proof that storms rearrange the natural world as much as they scatter ships. You twirl the feather between your fingers, then tuck it into the pages of your logbook. A small souvenir, harmless, yet somehow grounding. After all, humans are collectors by nature: shells, stones, ticket stubs, feathers. Little anchors against the tide of days. Later, while inspecting the shoreline, you stumble across more evidence of the storm's temper. Driftwood sprawls like skeletons across the rocks, and wedged among them is something stranger, a shoe. Not just any shoe, but a leather boot, cracked and swollen from the water. It looks as if it once belonged to someone who believed their footwear would last forever. Now, it's a ghostly remnant, too heavy to belong to any seabird prank. You turn it over, shaking out sand. No foot inside, thankfully. Still, it raises questions. Was it washed from a wreck? Lost by a fisherman? Or simply thrown out to sea by someone on shore, never expecting it to land on your little stage? Quirky tidbit, in some coastal folklore, finding a single shoe was considered a warning of bad luck, as though the sea was teasing you with half of a story. You smirk, muttering, "Well, thanks for the mystery, Poseidon. Guess I'll be waiting for the sequel shoe." You set it aside, planning to burn it in your next trash fire, though a tiny irrational part of you feels guilty, as if you're discarding someone's history. Back inside the tower, you return to routine. Oil levels, wick trimming, glass polishing. The storm rattled your nerves, but the chores settled them. the tick of order against the talk of chaos. You even hum a little, the tune bending off-key but keeping you company. In the quiet, though, you begin to wonder, if a ship did wreck nearby, how would you know? Would there be bodies? Survivors? Or would the sea erase everything, leaving only the occasional boot and barrel? Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers were expected to serve more as rescue men or as neutral observers of the sea. The official line was keep the light burning. Yet how could you not feel responsible, knowing sailors depended on you like moths to a flame? The afternoon drags, a long stretch of monotony. You attempt to mend the shutter upstairs, hammering in rhythm with the surf. The echo makes it sound as though you're building a symphony for nails and waves. When the job's done, you step back, proud of your slightly crooked handiwork. Sure, it leans like a drunk sailor, but it'll hold. Probably. For dinner, you relent and open another salted fish from the storm barrel treasure. The smell is still assertive enough to wake neighbors you don't have. You imagine sailors on long voyages choking down the same fare, and suddenly your lonely supper feels like a shared experience across time. A tiny community of saltfish suffers. As the lamp flares to life that night, you watch its beams sweep over the dark water. The rhythm is hypnotic, a pendulum of fire and glass. You lean on the railing, listening to the sigh of the wind. Somewhere far off, you think you hear the faint creak of rigging, but it might just be your imagination. Or the tower talking back. Before sleep, you pull out the feather again, running your finger along its edge. Strange how one storm can scatter so many little relics into your orbit, a feather, a shoe, a barrel of fish. Evidence that even unremarkable lives can gather fragments of the extraordinary, whether you ask for them or not. You set it on the table, extinguish the lamp, and slip into bed with the sound of waves stitching you into dreams. You wake with the sour tang of yesterday's fish still clinging to your breath, the kind of aftertaste that makes you vow, yet again, to invent a miracle condiment that would have saved countless sailors from culinary misery. Ketchup's already been invented, sure, but out here you'd settle for anything vaguely tomato-adjacent. The morning feels oddly still. No wind howling through the shutters, no gulls staging their usual noisy parliament outside. Just the soft lap of waves, like the sea trying to apologize for its stormy outburst. You step outside onto the gallery to stretch, the stones cool under your bare feet, and your eyes catch something faint on the horizon. Smoke! A thin line, so far away it could just be your imagination. But smoke means people, and people mean stories, and maybe, if you're lucky, mail. It reminds you that, once every few weeks, a supply boat makes the treacherous journey out here. Sometimes it brings fresh oil, sometimes bread or dried beans, and occasionally, on days when the universe is in a particularly generous mood, a stack of newspapers. Imagine that, news of revolutions, coronations, cricket matches, or factory strikes, all reaching your little rock weeks late, like gossip passed through an endless chain of whispers. Mainstream historical fact: by the mid-19th century, newspapers were mass-produced thanks to steam-powered presses, and even lighthouses on remote coasts often received them during supply runs. Many keepers kept clippings pasted into scrapbooks, treasuring headlines as proof the outside world still spun. You smile at the thought. Out here, you've got storms for drama and rocks for company, but no headlines. The gossip you get is limited to gulls fighting over fish guts. Not exactly front-page material. Still, you imagine holding a newspaper again, ink smudging your fingers, columns packed tight with stories. You picture yourself catching up on debates in Parliament, though truthfully, you'd be more excited by the serialized adventures, the kind where heroes dangle off cliffs every week. Some keepers even subscribe to penny dreadfuls, cheap little booklets filled with lurid tales. Quirky tidbit: One of the most popular involved a villain named Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. Not the kind of bedtime reading you'd expect from a man whose closest neighbors are ghosts of shipwrecks. You lean on the railing, scanning the horizon. The smoke drifts and dissolves, teasing you. You know better than to pin your hopes on punctual supply boats. Sometimes storms delay them for weeks. Sometimes months. And once in a blue moon, they simply don't come at all, forcing you to live off whatever scraps you can scavenge. It's funny, on land, people complain when the post is late by a day. Out here, you treat news like a comet, rare, unpredictable, and awe-inspiring when it finally streaks your way. By midday, with no boat in sight, you settle into tasks. You sweep grit out of the lantern room, polish the glass until it gleams, and recheck your oil. It's repetitive, yes, but repetition builds the kind of comfort that city folk chase with calendars and clocks. Out here, the tower is the calendar, the clock, the entire rhythm of existence. Later, rummaging through the drawer where you keep your meager paper supplies, you pull out an old newspaper you've read to tatters. The headline is months old, some political wrangling you've long forgotten, but you find yourself poring over the advertisements. There's a full-page illustration of a patent stove, all gleaming pipes and brass knobs, promising to revolutionize domestic life. You chuckle, imagining lugging such a contraption up these spiral stairs would be comedy enough. Still, the drawings feel like postcards from another planet. Historians still argue whether lighthouse solitude bred madness or simply a sharper imagination. Some claim keepers wrote endless letters, filling them with more detail than the recipients could ever want, what the gulls looked like today, how many beans boiled in the pot, how the wind hummed at different window cracks. Others believe most keepers surrendered to silence, letting the sea speak for them. You suspect both are true, depending on the day. The rest of the afternoon drips by. You stitch a rip in your coat, muttering curses at the thread that refuses to cooperate. You carve another notch into the doorframe, your makeshift calendar, though you've lost count of what month it is exactly. You hum a tune half remembered from years ago, repeating it until it becomes its own sort of prayer. By the time the sun dips, the smoke on the horizon is gone. No boat today. No newsprint. No smudged fingers or serialized cliffhangers. Just the same routine, the same cycle of chores. And yet, you don't feel cheated. Because part of you understands, the waiting is the thing. The slowness, the anticipation. The reminder that even the dullest life still flutters when given something to hope for, however small. That night, after trimming the wick and lighting the lamp, you sit at your desk, feather in hand, the storm's souvenir, and you jot a few words in your logbook. Saw smoke today. Boat uncertain. Still waiting. It's hardly the stuff of thrilling literature, but then again, maybe that's the point. The world records kings and generals, but someone needs to record the smoke that vanished, the boot washed ashore, the feather pressed between pages. Someone needs to notice. And right now, that someone is you. The morning fog lies thick enough that you could almost scoop it with a spoon, the tower's lantern above you muffled in pale gauze. You lean on the railing, mug of bitter chicory coffee in hand, and peer into a world that looks erased. There's no horizon, no sea, no sky, just whiteness, absolute and blank, like the world forgot to finish loading. Fog is tricky. Sailors dread it because it swallows landmarks whole, leaving even the most careful navigator fumbling. And for a lighthouse keeper like you, it's both a nuisance and a calling card. You keep the lamp burning brighter, longer, hoping the beam can cut through the shroud. Still, you know it's not foolproof. Mainstream historical fact: by the 19th century, many lighthouses added fog signals to compensate for their beams being swallowed by mist. Some used bells, others cannons, and later still, steam-powered foghorns that blared across miles. Imagine living beside a brass monster that bellowed like a wounded bull every half hour. Your eardrums would wave little white flags in surrender. You don't have a foghorn here, not yet. Instead, you've got a handbell, a battered relic you're meant to ring at intervals. Whether the sound actually travels far enough to matter is questionable. You sometimes suspect the bell is more for your sense of responsibility than for saving lives. But you ring it anyway, each clang swallowed instantly into the fog, as though the sea is collecting them, hoarding them like coins. There's something eerie about these mornings. The gulls fall silent, the waves hush themselves, and you're left with the uncanny impression that you're ringing a bell to a world that doesn't exist. It makes you think of the old belief, quirky tidbit incoming, that fog was caused by restless spirits wandering the sea, their breath clouding the air. Some fishermen swore that if you whistled, you could summon or banish the fog. You try it once or twice, pursing your lips, though you mostly succeed in startling yourself with how shrill the sound seems in the silence. The isolation feels sharper in fog. At least with storms you can see the sea thrashing, throwing tantrums. But fog? Fog is nothingness. It's like the world packed up and left, leaving you alone on your rock with your bell and your chores. You head back inside, lantern light behind you casting a faint glow into the mist. It's dim, but steady. Steadiness counts. You think of all the captains who must be creeping forward out there, staring into the blank whiteness, ears straining for any hint of land or rock. That thought keeps you dutiful, even when you suspect your little bell barely reaches beyond the gallery rail. By midday, the fog thickens still, pressing against the windows like wool. You can't even see the rocks below. You know they're there, jagged and hungry, but it feels like you've been lifted into the clouds. A keeper on the Irish coast once wrote that during prolonged fog, he began to feel like he was living inside a boiled egg. Historians still argue whether such descriptions were exaggeration or honest accounts of fog-induced cabin fever, but honestly, you believe him. You're halfway to cracking jokes about yokes yourself. The monotony gnaws. You polish the brass fittings again, though they hardly need it. You mend the tear in your sock with clumsy stitches, muttering about how you'd never qualify as anyone's grandmother. You pace the spiral stairs for exercise, climbing until your thighs burn. You even attempt to read aloud to yourself from an old almanac, pretending you're some grand lecturer addressing a hall of fog. The imaginary audience is polite but unresponsive. By evening, the fog has thinned only slightly. You light the lamp earlier than usual, trimming the wick carefully, coaxing the flame like it's a fragile child. The light shoots out into the gray, swallowed but persistent. You keep faith in persistence. Later, you take your logbook and write, fog heavy. Rang bell all day. No ship seen. The entry feels paltry, but then again, fog days always leave you with little to say. And maybe that's what makes them unsettling, the way they strip life down to almost nothing. Before bed, you step outside one last time. The fog clings still, though lighter now, and for the first time all day you catch a faint glimmer, the blurred edge of a star above. It's small, faint, almost apologetic. But it's there. Proof the world hasn't vanished, only hidden. You ring the bell one more time, softer this round, as if saying good night to the ghosts. Then you head back inside, where the lamp burns on, patient, until morning. The gulls wake you before the sun does, their cries sharp and repetitive, like they're auditioning for a horror movie soundtrack. You drag yourself up the spiral stairs, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and step out onto the gallery. The horizon is clear again, no fog, no storm, just an endless stretch of sea that looks as if it's been ironed flat overnight. It should be reassuring. Instead, it feels suspicious, like the ocean's plotting something behind your back. That suspicion grows as the hours pass. A breeze that had been playful in the morning turns moody by noon. You watch the sea shift from a polite blue to a darker, steelier gray. A band of clouds gathers low and thick to the west, their bellies swollen like sullen bullies looking for a fight. You know the signs. The lighthouse manual might dress it up in official terms like barometric disturbance, but you know it more plainly: a storm's coming. Mainstream historical fact: coastal records from the 19th century show how lighthouse keepers were often the first to spot storms. Without radio, their observations, written in damp logbooks and relayed by boat, were the warnings that sometimes saved entire towns. You think of that as you tighten the shutters on the keeper's house, moving with the practiced motions of someone who's done this before. The wind picks up by afternoon, howling around the tower like some bored banshee. You brace your lantern windows with extra lashings, muttering under your breath about how you should have been born in a calmer profession, like librarian or clockmaker. At least clocks only yell at you once an hour. Inside, the air pressure seems to shift with the storm. You feel it in your ears, a dull throb. You glance at the barometer nailed to the wall, its needle sinking lower and lower like a drunkard sliding off his stool. You jot down the reading in your log, though you could have guessed it without the brass dial. The sea, meanwhile, is no longer polite. By dusk, waves slam into the rocks below, each one exploding upward in a froth of white spray. You can feel the vibrations through the soles of your boots. You mutter one of those half-jokes, half-truths you've come to rely on: if the sea gets any closer, it'll start charging rent. Quirky tidbit: some keepers believed storms were heralded by unusual animal behavior. Cats licking their paws excessively, gulls flying inland, or dogs howling in odd pitches. You don't have a cat, and the gulls seem as unhelpful as ever, but you swear the mice in the pantry are throwing some kind of tiny rave tonight. Maybe they know something you don't. By full night, the storm hits in earnest. Rain hammers the windows like a million impatient fists. Wind shrieks down the chimney, rattling the grate. You climb the stairs again and again, checking the lamp, adjusting the wick, making sure the glass is clear of condensation. The flame inside burns bright and defiant, its light slicing through sheets of rain. You can't help but feel proud of it, like a parent watching a child hold steady in a school play while chaos erupts backstage. Still, the work wears on you. You've barely dried your coat before you're soaked again. Your hands smell perpetually of wet rope and lamp oil. You pace, you mutter, you laugh at your own mutterings, because storms demand some outlet for nerves. And all the while, the sea rages, a theater of violence you watch from your precarious balcony. At some point, between checks, you remember the story of the Eddystone Lighthouse off England. The original wooden tower was destroyed by fire, the second swept away by storms, and only the third, built by John Smeaton in the 18th century, using interlocking stone blocks like a giant jigsaw puzzle, finally stood firm. Historians still argue whether Smeaton's design was pure genius or just lucky timing with improved materials, but either way, you send him a silent thank you. Without his influence, your own tower might have crumbled long ago. Hours blur into one another. Midnight passes, though you wouldn't know it without your clock. Time loses its meaning in the roar of wind and waves. You check the lamp again, sip bitter tea, check the lamp once more. The rhythm is hypnotic, exhausting, relentless. By dawn, the storm hasn't ended, but it has softened. The clouds are fraying at the edges, the wind less furious. The sea still heaves, but no longer with murderous intent. You stand on the gallery, hair plastered to your skull, coat dripping, and breathe in the aftermath, that sharp, metallic smell of storm-cleansed air. The rocks glisten below, black and wet, while the first sunlight of the new day slides across the horizon. You feel like you've survived some private war, the kind where the only metals are damp boots and sore shoulders. And yet, the lamp still burns. The tower still stands. The sea, as always, retreats into itself, pretending innocence. You head back inside, peel off your soaked coat, and write in the log, storm lasted 12 hours. Lamp steady. Keeper damp but intact. It's enough. The morning after the storm is quieter than a library at midnight. You wake to a strange silence, the kind that makes you suspicious rather than relieved. Your ears, still ringing faintly from the howls of last night's gale, don't quite trust it. But when you step out onto the gallery, the world has been rinsed clean. The sky is a pale blue, streaked with thin cirrus clouds like feathers left behind by some celestial pillow fight. The sea below, though still restless, has traded fury for rhythm, its waves rolling in with a steady crash that almost feels rehearsed. You lean on the iron railing, breathing in deeply. Everything smells sharper, fresher, salt, seaweed, and that unmistakable after-storm tang of ozone. The gulls are back to their endless heckling, like neighborhood gossipers who can't resist telling you how badly you handled things. Yes, thank you. I'm aware I look like a drowned rat, you mutter under your breath, earning yourself a sideways glance from one particularly bold bird perched nearby. The work, of course, doesn't pause just because nature gave you a beating. You trudge back inside and look at the chaos left behind. Damp boots in the corner, ropes coiled in sloppy heaps, the barometer needle still sulking near storm. And your logbook, its latest entry written in hurried, smudged ink. You sigh. The lighthouse may be your fortress, but it never cleans itself. You fetch a broom, mop, and bucket, your arsenal against the post-storm disorder. Sweeping the spiral stairs is an exercise in patience. Every creak and bend feels like it conspires to send dust tumbling down to where you've already swept. Whoever designed spiral staircases, you mutter, probably had a personal grudge against housekeepers. Yet you keep at it, step by step, because tidying is as much ritual as necessity. Mainstream historical fact, lighthouse service manuals in the 19th century stress cleanliness as a point of pride. Inspectors could appear unannounced, checking not only the lamp but also the condition of the keeper's quarters. A dusty stairwell or sloppy logbook might dock your pay. Imagine being scolded for not dusting when you've just spent 12 hours preventing ships from smashing into rocks. It's bureaucracy at its finest. You move next to the windows, their panes speckled with dried salt. The cloth squeaks against the glass as you scrub, and slowly the horizon sharpens back into clarity. The work has a hypnotic rhythm: scrub, rinse, dry, step back. And while you may not admit it loudly, there's satisfaction in restoring order, and proving that storms can't have the final word. By midday, you're in the pantry, surveying the wreckage left by the mice. They've been bold, one entire sack of oats gnawed open, little trails of droppings betraying their celebration. Quirky tidbit: some keepers in isolated stations tried to domesticate their pests. Stories tell of mice fed crumbs on purpose until they became tame, running across tables without fear. You consider this as you set another trap, thinking maybe you've been too harsh, but then you remember your ruined oats and decide mercy is overrated. Outside, the rocks gleam like wet ink under the sun. You descend the slippery steps to check for storm damage. Seaweed is tangled everywhere, ropey green strands draped over stones like unwanted garlands. Driftwood lies in broken piles, some pieces smooth and twisted, others sharp enough to look like improvised weapons. You haul a few of the sturdier logs back toward the house, planning to dry them for firewood. On the way, you spot something caught between two boulders, a glass bottle, its surface clouded by sand and salt. Your heart leaps briefly. Bottle messages are the stuff of stories, after all. You pry it free, feeling the barnacles scratch your palms, only to discover it's empty. No treasure map. No desperate note. Just stale seawater. You laugh at yourself, shaking your head. Still, you keep it. A lighthouse keeper can always use an extra bottle. Back inside, you sit to write another log entry, the nib scratching across the page. You document the storm's damage: one rope frayed beyond repair, pantry raided, 2 hours wasted sweeping water from the gallery floor. You add a small flourish at the end, something inspectors might frown at but which makes you smile: storm, 1, keeper, 1, match drawn. Later, as you polish the brass fittings of the lamp, your mind drifts. You think about all the keepers before you, those whose names never made it into history books. Their work was always the same: storm, clean, repeat. The lamp was their constant companion, glowing through every tide of monotony and chaos. Historians still argue whether the profession should be remembered as heroic duty or mind-numbing drudgery. You figure it's a bit of both, equal parts glory and boredom, like most things in life. As evening falls, you step outside again. The world has settled into calm. The sea glimmers gold in the setting sun, the air cool but gentle. You lean on the railing, arms sore from scrubbing, but chest light with the knowledge that you've restored a fragile order. The lamp flickers on as dusk deepens, its beam sweeping slow arcs across the horizon. And you, watching it, feel the rarest kind of peace, a peace earned through storm, sweat, and a few too many muttered conversations with gulls. The morning begins with a sluggish fog that creeps across the sea like a thief with soft footsteps. You don't notice it at first when you roll out of your cot, rubbing your eyes and wondering if your knees always crack that loudly or if they're staging a rebellion today. But by the time you light your little stove for tea, you glance out the window and see it, the horizon swallowed whole, the world reduced to a ghostly gray blur. Fog has a personality all its own. Unlike a storm that shouts its intentions or a gale that rattles your bones, fog sneaks in quietly, wraps itself around the lighthouse, and refuses to let go. You step outside onto the gallery and the world feels muffled, like someone has stuffed cotton in your ears. Even the gulls sound distant, their cries muted into faint squawks you might mistake for your stomach if you'd skipped breakfast. Historically, fog was one of the greatest enemies of mariners in the 19th century. Without radar or modern instruments, a ship could lose its bearings in minutes. Some vessels even collided with rocks despite being within sight of the beam, because light, no matter how strong, diffuses strangely in mist. It's why many stations eventually added foghorns, clanging bells, or even cannons fired on schedule to warn ships. But today, in your little lighthouse, there's no such contraption. Just you, your lamp, and a voice that probably wouldn't carry beyond the rocks. You pace along the gallery, leaning over the rail. Below, the waves are still there, you hear them slapping rhythmically against the rocks, but you can't see them. It's unsettling, like standing over a trapdoor that might vanish at any second. For a fleeting moment, you imagine what it would feel like to leap into the whiteness, not knowing whether the sea was right beneath you or a mile away. Then you shake your head. Clearly, you mutter, the fog is getting into my brain. Back inside, you fuss with the lamp. The flame seems brighter when there's nothing to measure it against, its glow swallowed and reborn in the vapor pressing against the glass. You polish the lens again, though it hardly needs it, because that's what you do when the weather leaves you powerless, you cling to ritual. By mid-morning, you retreat to the logbook. The ink scratches across the page, dense fog since dawn. Visibility, less than 1 cable length. You pause, frowning. Cable length is an old nautical measure, about 200 yards, but your readers might think you're talking about extension cords. You smirk at the thought, sailors dragging bright orange plastic cables across the Atlantic. If only. the quiet starts to get to you. It's a strange quiet, not empty, but smothered. You make another cup of tea, sip it slowly, then decide to fetch your harmonica. You sit by the window and blow a tune, something vaguely resembling a sea shanty. The sound wavers in the fog, bouncing oddly in the damp air. For a second, you think you hear another note joining yours, a faint echo, or maybe another harmonica out there in the mist. Goosebumps prickle your arms. Quirky tidbit, in some maritime folklore, fog was said to be haunted. Sailors spun tales of phantom crews drifting alongside them, or fog-eaters, spirits that suck the air from your lungs. One particularly odd belief insisted that fog was caused by ghostly whales exhaling together. You smile at that image, an invisible choir of undead whales, blowing smoke across the sea just to mess with mariners. You glance at your tea. Nope, not strong enough for hallucinations, you assure yourself. The day drags. You clean a shelf. You mend a shirt. You eat lunch, though it tastes muted, like even your food has been fogged. When you step outside again, the whiteness still clings, shifting only slightly. The lamp's light carves a hazy tunnel into nothingness, and you're reminded of standing in a hallway where all the doors are locked. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers dreaded fog more than storms. On one hand, storms threatened immediate destruction but gave you something to do: tighten ropes, haul water, shout curses at the heavens. Fog, by contrast, demanded patience, and patience is harder to muster when you're already half lonely and listening too closely to your own breathing. As evening approaches, you prepare the lamp for its long vigil. You trim the wick carefully, clean the soot, and light it early, knowing that somewhere out there, a ship might be creeping forward blindly. You picture the sailors squinting into the haze, praying for even the faintest glow. That's your job, after all, not heroics, just constancy. Show up, shine light, and hope someone sees it. The foghorn would have helped. You think about how some keepers improvised before official horns were installed, striking iron sheets with hammers, firing pistols, even ringing giant dinner bells. You wonder if you should drag your own pan outside and start clanging it like a desperate cook announcing supper. Dinner's ready, if you can find it, you imagine yelling. Night deepens, and the fog doesn't lift. You sit by the lamp, eyes tired but watchful. The world is blank, but your duty is sharp. Somewhere beyond that curtain, wood creaks, sails strain, and captains whisper prayers. You don't hear them, but you know they're out there. And as the lamp's steady sweep cuts through the murk, you realize that fog teaches its own lesson: not every danger roars. Some dangers tiptoe in slippers, smothering you with quiet, waiting to see if you can endure the silence. The fog that lingered all through the night finally loosens its grip in the early hours, peeling away in shreds like damp linen on a clothesline. You step outside into the salt-tinged chill, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you can see the horizon. The sea rolls out in layers of blue and silver, gulls wheel freely overhead, and the air seems almost too sharp after yesterday's muffled silence. You stretch your arms and yawn, feeling as though you've just been let out of solitary confinement. But visibility means one thing: the mail boat might be coming today. And that prospect shifts your whole mood. Out here, cut off from the mainland, letters and parcels aren't just little envelopes and packages, they're lifelines. Without them, the world shrinks to you, the lamp, and the gulls. With them, suddenly the universe rushes back in, spilling over your desk in ink and folded paper. You spend half the morning peering toward the hazy line of the horizon, scanning for a speck of sail or a puff of smoke from a small steamer. It's like waiting for a guest who may or may not show, except you can't exactly text them, "Hey, you on the way?" Instead, you pace the gallery, check the logbook, tidy your boots, then pays some more. Mail runs to lighthouses in the 19th century were erratic at best. Some stations got deliveries every 2 weeks if weather cooperated, others might wait months. A few particularly isolated towers in the far north sometimes saw only 2 mail calls a year. And if storms delayed the boat? Tough luck. You just had to hope your aunt's birthday letter wasn't sitting soggy in some courier's bag. By mid-morning, you finally spot it, a small boat bobbing steadily toward you. Relief tingles through your arms. You hustle down the spiral stairs, boots clanging against the iron steps, then cross the rocks with a little more spring in your step than usual. The boat bumps against the landing stage, and the familiar face of the mailman greets you. He doesn't linger, he never does, but he hands over a leather pouch with a grunt, mutters something about the swell, and is gone again before you can ask about gossip from town. Back inside, you plunk the pouch on the table like a treasure chest. You savor the moment, fingers lingering on the buckle, stretching the suspense. Finally, you open it. Inside, a small pile of envelopes, the odd newspaper, and, blessed mercy, a tin of biscuits wrapped in brown paper. You actually laugh aloud. To anyone else, biscuits are biscuits. To you, they're a decadent miracle. You tear into the letters first. One from your sister, full of family chatter and the neighbor's new cow, which apparently escaped twice and had to be chased by half the village. One from an old shipmate, boasting about a storm he survived that definitely grows taller with each retelling. A notice from the lighthouse board, dry and bureaucratic, reminding you about the exact protocol for oil rationing, as if you didn't already measure every drop like a miser counting coins. And then there's a folded sheet from a friend who always manages to write something odd. This time, it's a sketch of what he calls a velocipede, basically an early bicycle, insisting it'll revolutionize travel. You chuckle at the thought of pedaling such a contraption across the rocks to the lantern room. You'd break your neck before you made it halfway. You spread the newspaper across the table next. The ink smudges your fingers, but you don't care. The stories feel like oxygen. Political squabbles, reports of gold finds in Australia, a serialized novel installment. You devour every column, even the ads. One advertises patent medicine that promises to cure everything from baldness to melancholy. Maybe I should order a case, you mutter, patting your thinning hairline. Quirky tidbit, some lighthouse keepers actually subscribe to pen pal clubs through newspapers, trading letters with strangers around the world just to feel less isolated. One fellow off the coast of Maine wrote so prolifically to a woman in Boston that they eventually married, though legend claims he nearly missed the wedding because the mail boat was 3 weeks late. The biscuits, though, those you savor last. You dunk one into your tea, the soggy sweetness dissolving on your tongue, and for a moment the lighthouse doesn't feel so far away from home. Historians still argue whether the irregular mail strengthened or weakened keepers' mental health. Some say the bursts of connection provided crucial relief. Others insist the long silences between deliveries only made the loneliness sharper, like dangling a feast in front of someone who's starving. You suppose both might be true. Still, you'd rather take the letters when they come than live without them at all. By evening, the fog has burned off completely, the lamp gleams brighter than ever, and your desk is cluttered with papers that smell faintly of ink, town air, and biscuits. You linger over them, rereading each word until the edges grow soft. Because tomorrow, the pouch will be empty again, and the wait will start over. And yet tonight, you feel tethered to the world once more, a little less adrift in the endless sea. Morning light pours through the narrow windows, and you wake to the sound of your stomach grumbling. It's not exactly the romantic symphony of waves and gulls, more like a cranky old kettle refusing to boil. You pull on your boots and shuffle down to the kitchen, knowing exactly what's on the menu: porridge. Again. Porridge has become such a fixture of your life that you could probably prepare it blindfolded, one hand tied behind your back, and the other still half asleep. Oats, water, pinch of salt, nothing fancy. Sometimes, if fortune smiles, you splash in a bit of milk powder or crumble a lump of sugar over the top, but usually it's just that bland, dependable sludge. You stir it slowly, watching the steam coil upward, and think, well, this is what keeps a lighthouse keeper standing. Food here is a constant battle between monotony and scarcity. Every few weeks, supplies arrive in crates: flour, dried beans, salt pork, hardtack, tinned vegetables if you're lucky. They come with stern little notes about rationing, because heaven forbid you eat all the good stuff in week 1 and spend the next 3 gnawing candle wax. You quickly learn the art of stretching meals, making stew that lasts 3 nights, or reboiling yesterday's coffee grounds because, honestly, what else are you going to do? Sometimes you get creative. A stew of lentils and pork bones becomes seafaring casserole if you rename it out loud. A slab of salted cod fried with too much grease turns into celebratory fish. You laugh at your own jokes, because no one else is there to do it. And in a way, that ridiculous renaming game keeps your sanity intact. There's a certain pride in stretching supplies like this. Historically, keepers were chosen not only for their reliability but also for their ability to manage provisions with monk-like discipline. Records show that the Trinity House in Britain actually tested keepers on basic cookery and budgeting before hiring them. Because let's face it, you can't guide ships safely if you faint halfway up the lantern stairs from hunger. Quirky tidbit: some keepers developed peculiar cravings thanks to long isolation. One Scottish journal mentions a man who ate oatmeal 3 times a day for 30 years, by choice, and swore it was the only honest food. Another preferred onion sandwiches so pungent that visitors could smell them from the pier. You, mercifully, haven't sunk that far yet, though your porridge is beginning to taste suspiciously like wallpaper paste. And then there are the feast days. Maybe it's your birthday, maybe it's Christmas, or maybe it's just the day the supply boat arrives early. You throw caution to the wind, crack open that rare tin of peaches, and devour it in one sitting. Sweet syrup dribbling down your chin feels almost decadent, like you're feasting in some royal hall. Never mind that your banquet is just you, a spoon, and a wobbly wooden table surrounded by drafty stone walls. You sometimes daydream about food with a kind of dreamy devotion. Fresh bread, imagine the warm crust snapping under your teeth. Butter melting into it. A roast chicken with crisp skin. Strawberries so ripe they stain your fingers. You close your eyes and sigh, and for a fleeting moment, you can almost taste them. Then reality clatters back when you open your cupboard and see nothing but beans. Historians still argue whether the limited diet of lighthouse keepers was adequate. Some claim the preserved foods provided all necessary sustenance, pointing to keepers who lived robustly into old age. Others highlight malnutrition, scurvy, and digestive issues as common occupational hazards. You nod at both arguments while poking your porridge, convinced that no human being should ever have to eat this much oat in one lifetime. Lunch is hardly different from breakfast, maybe cold leftovers or a slab of bread so hard you could use it to shingle the roof. Dinner is the main event being a very generous term. Still, there's something ritualistic about lighting the little stove, measuring the flour, adding a dash of pepper if you've got any left. The routine itself comforts you, even if the taste doesn't. After supper, you sometimes invent imaginary cookbooks, the Lighthouse Gourmet, featuring chapters like 101 Ways to Boil Beans and Salt Pork, but make it sexy. You grin at your own absurdity. Humor becomes its own kind of seasoning, sprinkled generously over meals that otherwise taste like seawater and monotony. Tonight, though, you've saved one of those biscuits from yesterday's mail pouch. You dunk it in tea, lean back, and sigh like a man who has just conquered Rome. Small pleasures matter most when the rest of life is as predictable as the tide. The storm hits just before dawn. You wake to the windows rattling in their frames, the walls moaning like an old man with aching knees, and the steady boom of waves throwing themselves against the rocks below. It's the sort of sound that makes you wonder if the lighthouse is going to get up and walk away out of sheer annoyance. You pull on your oilskin coat and climb the spiral stairs, one hand on the rail as the whole tower seems to tremble. At the lantern room, the glass panes are slick with sheets of rain, and the beam swings across the darkness like a defiant sword cutting at the storm. You steady yourself against the wall, listening to the wind howl. It's not just noise, it's a living thing, roaring and clawing, as though the sky itself resents the little glow of your lamp. There's no way you're going back to sleep. The storm has worked for you. Every few minutes you check the lamp, trim the wick, keep the oil flowing. The storm may want to drown the light, but you aren't about to let it. Mariners out there, if there are any mad enough to be sailing tonight, depend on this fragile beam not to vanish. Historical fact, storms have always been the true test of lighthouse keeping. In 1838, the hurricane that smashed the Morant Point Lighthouse in Jamaica also swept away parts of its iron railings. Keepers often describe storms as battles, humans versus nature, frail towers against the endless ocean. And here you are, caught in one of those eternal battles. You peer down at the rocks below and can barely see them through the spray. Waves explode in white fountains that reach nearly halfway up the tower. You mutter a nervous joke to yourself, if this place goes under, maybe you'll finally learn how to swim. Inside, everything drips. Water sneaks in through cracks, trickles down the stairwell, and pools in the kitchen like a surprise puddle. You drag out rags and a bucket, knowing full well you'll never keep up with it. Your stew pot rattles on the stove as if even the cookware wants to evacuate. Quirky tidbit, some lighthouse keepers claim storms brought strange gifts. One diary mentions fish literally flung onto the lantern gallery by violent waves. Another told of a storm that carried away his outhouse, leaving him in a very awkward predicament. You check your gallery nervously, half expecting to see a tuna flop onto it. By midday, the storm is at its worst. The wind screams so loudly it drowns out your thoughts. You brace the door with a chair, just in case. Thunder rolls overhead, making the stone tower vibrate like a tuning fork. For a ridiculous moment, you imagine the whole building taking off like a rocket, spinning into the clouds with you clinging to the stair rail. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers were truly safe in their towers during the worst gales. Some insist the heavy stone walls provided near invulnerability, while others point to the tragic collapses of lighthouses in the 19th century, like the original Eddystone Tower, which was swept away in 1703. The truth probably lies somewhere between. You're safer than a fisherman in an open boat, but still one unlucky gust away from disaster. Evening comes, but the storm doesn't. You heat a pot of thin stew, eating it in silence while rain lashes the windows. It tastes like little more than salt and boiled potatoes, but it warms your belly, and tonight that's enough. Afterward, you sit with your journal, writing slowly. Storm began at 4 bells, waves over gallery, lantern steady. The words are plain, but they tether you to reality. Night stretches on. The storm makes sleep impossible, so you take turns pacing the lantern room and staring out into the black void, where the beam disappears into a curtain of rain. Somewhere out there, maybe, a ship glances up at that light and feels a moment of relief. That's enough to keep you awake and stubborn. Finally, just before dawn, the storm loosens its grip. The wind softens to a weary moan, the rain thins to drizzle, and the sea, though still restless, no longer tries to claw the tower down. You slump into a chair, exhausted but oddly proud. You didn't win, exactly, but you endured, and that counts for something. The storm leaves behind a silence almost louder than the chaos. You step outside at first light, boots sinking into waterlogged earth, the air sharp with the smell of seaweed and churned brine. The rocks are slick with foam, gulls already wheeling back in as if they've been hiding behind the curtains waiting for their cue. You breathe deep, tasting salt that isn't just on your lips, it's in your lungs, in your hair, probably in your socks too. The lighthouse still stands, scarred but steady. The gallery railings glisten, battered by spray, and the panes of the lantern are smeared with streaks of salt that blur the beam. Your hands find the stone wall, and you pat it like a tired horse after a long ride. It survived another round, and so did you. Inside, though, is another story. The kitchen floor is a shallow pond. You slosh through it with a mop, muttering about how you signed up to keep a light, not an aquarium. The chair you wedged against the door is warped from the damp, and your mattress is soggy at one corner where water sneaked in. There's no such thing as true dryness here, just varying shades of damp. Historical fact, after heavy storms, lighthouse keepers often had to spend days scrubbing and repairing damage. Salt could corrode brass fittings, swell wooden doors, and even crack window frames. Records show some keepers used vinegar to clean salt off glass, partly effective, but mostly smelly. You take stock. The oil barrels are intact, though their lids are rusted from the spray. The food stores are safe too, hardtack, dried beans, a little salted pork. Not gourmet, but enough. You hang your wet clothes near the stove, imagining they'll dry sometime before the next storm in 2037. And then comes the less glamorous part of recovery, patching leaks, sweeping debris, and picking seaweed out of strange places. At one point, you discover a small crab scuttling across your floor. You carry it back outside, muttering, "This is not a boarding house," though secretly you admire its determination. Quirky tidbit, some keepers use storm-washed seaweed as insulation, stuffing it into cracks in walls. You consider it for a moment, then remember how bad rotting kelp smells and decide soggy socks are preferable. By midday, your body aches from hauling buckets and hammering boards, but there's still the light to clean. Up in the lantern room, you scrape away dried salt from the windows. Each pane is a little clearer, until the view of the sea sharpens again. The lamp itself gets attention too, trim the wick, polish the reflectors, refill the oil. You handle it almost tenderly, like a fragile pet bird you're responsible for keeping alive. Historians still argue whether keepers exaggerated the post-storm workload to win sympathy in their journals. Some entries sound almost theatrical. Waves crashed over the gallery, drowning us in despair, yet we endured. Others are clipped and stoic, wind from the northeast. Damage moderate. Maybe the truth is both, sometimes melodrama, sometimes understatement. You suspect you'll land somewhere in the middle. When evening comes, the lighthouse feels different. The tower groans less, the air is calmer, and the horizon glows faintly pink. You lean against the rail, watching the sea breathe instead of rage. There's still a heaviness in your limbs, but it's softened by relief. You survived the storm, and now you survive the cleanup. Dinner is simple, bread a little stale, cheese a little sharp, tea a little weak. But it tastes like peace. You eat it with your boots off, socks steaming by the stove, and for once you don't mind the monotony. Normalcy is a luxury after being shaken like dice in a cup for 24 hours straight. The night is uneventful, which feels like a blessing. You climb the stairs, check the lamp, and then just sit in the lantern room, listening to the steady hum of the flame. Outside, the sea stretches quiet and endless again, as if nothing ever happened. That's the thing about storms, they roar in, tear everything apart, and then slink away, leaving you to stitch yourself back together. And in that stillness, you find something like gratitude. The storm tested you, but it also reminded you why you're here, to keep the light steady no matter what, to endure even when the sea throws its tantrums. You whisper to yourself, half as a joke, half as a promise, still standing. You wake up to a rare thing, quiet. No waves hammering the walls, no shutters rattling like loose teeth, no wind shrieking through the keyhole. Just a low hush of the sea rolling in and out, almost polite for once. Your body feels heavy, like you've been weighted down by invisible sandbags, but at least you're not being tossed around. After the storm's chaos, the stillness almost feels suspicious, like a cat that suddenly stops meowing. You look out the window expecting to see some new disaster, but it's just a calm, gray morning. Your first job is still the same, tend the light. It has survived, like you, a little battered but burning. You climb the stairs slowly, pausing on each landing to stretch the muscles you abused yesterday hauling buckets and hammering boards. In the lantern room, the lens looks cleaner after your scrubbing spree. Sunlight reflects off the glass, making rainbows dance faintly on the walls. It feels like a small thank you gift from the tower itself. Downstairs, the kitchen still smells faintly of damp wood and smoke. You boil water for tea and dig into the food stores again. Today you allow yourself a slightly bigger breakfast, bread, cheese, and even a bit of salted meat. Recovery deserves calories, you reason. Mainstream historical fact, lighthouse keepers were often issued extra rations compared to ordinary laborers because the job demanded constant physical effort, and sometimes the isolation meant you couldn't easily resupply. So, yes, more cheese, it's practically mandated. After breakfast, you wander outside with a bucket to collect rainwater pooled in stone hollows. You squat down near a tide pool and watch tiny fish dart in the shallows. For a moment, you just sit there, toes digging into damp sand, the sun warming your back. It feels almost like a holiday. You even consider lying down, but then remember how quickly one nap on the rocks could become newspaper headline, "Keeper swept to sea." You settle for leaning back and breathing deep. A quirky tidbit floats into your head. Some keepers actually kept gardens on rocky islands, hauling soil in sacks and piling it into little plots. They grew potatoes, onions, or hardy herbs in whatever cracks they could coax into life. You picture yourself planting carrots between the stones, naming each one for a ship you've saved. Probably easier than naming them after your exes. Midday brings chores, but you move through them more slowly today. You repair a shutter, oil the hinges on the door, and check the ropes for hauling supplies. Everything smells faintly of tar, salt, and sun. It's mundane work, yet strangely satisfying, like piecing together a puzzle only you ever see. You know no visitor will marvel at a perfectly oiled hinge, but you will. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers romanticize their quiet days in their journals or if they truly found contentment in such small labors. Some modern readers think they were exaggerating to avoid sounding depressed, others believe the rhythm of maintenance really was soothing. As you wipe your brow and lean against the wall, you feel convinced of the latter. There's something deeply human about fixing what's broken, however small. Afternoon drifts by with less urgency than usual. You sit with a battered notebook, making a list of what survived the storm and what didn't. The handwriting is messy, the ink smudged by damp, but you feel oddly proud of the record. It's your little history, even if no one else ever reads it. You doodle a crude sketch of the lighthouse, waves exaggerated, gulls hovering like awkward balloons. You laugh at your own terrible art and then keep sketching anyway. As evening slides in, the sea blushes with a warm glow. You sit on the gallery with a mug of weak tea, watching the horizon melt into pink and orange. The calm feels earned. You survived, repaired, and now you can simply sit, the light above you beginning its nightly sweep across the water. Dinner is another simple affair, though you linger over it, savoring each bite as if to stretch the piece. Bread, beans, maybe a little butter if you're lucky. You tell yourself you'll cook something more ambitious tomorrow, then chuckle because ambitious in lighthouse terms just means boiling beans twice instead of once. When night comes, you climb back up to check the lamp again. The glass sparkles, the flame is steady, the beam cuts across the calm sea. You press your forehead lightly to the cool glass and whisper, "We made it." The words disappear into the night, absorbed by wind and water. Back downstairs, you crawl into bed with damp hair and tired bones, pulling the blanket close. Sleep comes easier after days like this, when the silence feels less like loneliness and more like mercy. You're not waiting for another storm tonight, you're just resting, body sinking, mind drifting. The sea, too, seems to be resting. And together, you exhale. The next morning greets you with the steady thud of waves against the rocks, not violent but insistent, like a giant knocking politely at your door. You peel yourself out of bed, feeling the stiffness in your shoulders from yesterday's repairs. Every muscle complains, but in a lazy, not life-threatening way. That, in lighthouse terms, is progress. You head up to the lantern room, still carrying the muscle memory of yesterday's climb. The lamp is steady, the glass clean, and the view expansive. For once, the sea feels almost friendly. It stretches endlessly, broken only by a few whitecaps and the faint silhouette of a distant sail. You squint and smile, human life, a speck far out there. You wonder if the crew is watching your light, trusting it, maybe even cursing it for being a reminder of how far they are from shore. You climb back down, make your usual tea, and chew your bread. Breakfast feels ritualistic now, every sip and bite a way of saying, yes, you're still here, still alive, still watching. Mainstream historical fact, many lighthouse keepers maintain almost identical routines day after day, down to the time they checked the lamp, the hour they swept the floors, and the moment they recorded weather in the logbook. The monotony wasn't just a quirk, it was survival, a mental shield against the slow creep of madness. After breakfast, you take a walk around the base of the tower, checking for cracks in the masonry. The salty spray has left streaks like pale veins across the stone. You trace one with your finger, half worried, half fascinated. You imagine the sea, patient and endless, trying to erode you just as it erodes the rock. But for now, the tower stands. The air is crisp and cool, carrying a faint scent of kelp. Gulls will overhead, their cries sharp and echoing. You watch them squabble over something unidentifiable floating in the surf. A quirky tidbit pops into your head. Lighthouse keepers often gave names to seabirds that lingered near the tower. Some even swore they could recognize the same gulls returning year after year. You consider naming the loudest one opera, since it seems determined to provide free concerts at maximum volume. By midday, you're back at your chores. You oil the lantern's clockwork, polish brass fittings, and sweep the tower steps. You find satisfaction in the repetition, even if it's thankless. Still, there's a strange comfort in knowing no one will critique your work except the sea, and it has no pen, no paper, no opinion section. In the afternoon, the weather shifts. Clouds pile up, thick and low, darkening the horizon. You pull on your coat and step outside to watch the swell. The sea churns heavier, but it doesn't look dangerous, just unsettled, like it's grumbling to itself. You stand there a long time, letting the wind tangle your hair and the salt stick to your skin. Historians still argue whether long-term isolation made lighthouse keepers more philosophical or simply more practical. Some journals read like meditations on the nature of time and eternity, others obsess over mundane details like how many spoons were polished in a week. You feel yourself teetering somewhere between the two, both musing on infinity and fretting over the rust on a hinge. Evening falls, bringing with it the slow ritual of lighting. You trim the wick carefully, strike the flame, and watch the glow bloom in the glass. The lens catches it, magnifies it, and sends it sweeping across the water. You pause, watching it slice through the gloom, steady as a heartbeat. There's a kind of magic in it, technology and devotion intertwined. Dinner tonight is humble again, beans and bread. You sit at the table, the oil lamp flickering, and let your mind wander. You think of other keepers across the coast, each one sitting down at a similar table, each one chewing in the same silence. A whole fraternity of solitary people, united in their isolation. It's strangely comforting. Night deepens, and you climb once more to check the lamp. The flame is steady, the glass clear, the sweep rhythmic. You rest your hand against the railing and gaze out over the Black Sea. Somewhere out there, sailors trust your light to keep them off the rocks. They'll never know you, and you'll never know them, but the connection is real all the same. Back downstairs, you curl into bed, the storm muttering faintly in the distance. You pull the blanket to your chin and let your breathing sink with the steady pulse of waves against the tower. The world feels vast, unknowable, and yet oddly small at the same time. You are a single keeper, in a single lighthouse, but tonight the sea bows slightly to your watchfulness. You close your eyes and drift into the rhythm, steady and unbroken. The morning drags you awake with a pale, silver light filtering through the narrow window. You groan a little, stretch, and wonder how on earth this thin mattress hasn't entirely flattened under the weight of your nightly tossing. Still, it's serviceable, like most things here. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and hear the faint thump of waves far below, a reminder that you are never, ever far from the sea's voice. You dress quickly, the damp air already making your clothes cling in odd places. On the table sits your battered logbook. You open it, dip the pen, and write down the weather: calm, light wind, visibility good. It's a bland entry, but bland is a gift in lighthouse terms. Breakfast is the usual: bread that's getting a little harder, cheese that's edging toward funky, and tea that smells faintly of smoke. You take a bite, chew thoughtfully, and chuckle to yourself. Mainstream historical fact: lighthouse keepers in the 19th century often had to make do with stale bread and salted meat between supply runs, and it was common for them to joke grimly about their gourmet diet. You raise your crust and mock toast to the invisible audience of other keepers, chewing with exaggerated flair. Afterward, you carry a bucket down to the cistern and check the water supply. It's holding steady, though you can taste a hint of sea salt in it. A reminder that even your drinking water carries the fingerprint of the ocean. By late morning, you decide to climb outside the lantern gallery for a closer look at the glass. Harness on, rope secured, you inch carefully around the outer ledge, rag in one hand, the world yawning open on the other side. The sea spreads vast beneath you, hypnotic in its shifting blues and greens. You pause, heart pounding just a little faster, and laugh under your breath. Imagine explaining this job to someone who's never seen the sea. Oh, yes, I dangle myself hundreds of feet in the air so that a piece of glass can sparkle better at night. Totally reasonable. You polish slowly, methodically. The glass gleams brighter with every swipe, catching slivers of sunlight and scattering them across the water. A gull swoops by, far too close, squawking loudly as though criticizing your technique. You hiss at it, but it doesn't care. Quirky tidbit: some keepers swore gulls had personalities and vendettas, claiming the same bird would return day after day just to harass them. You decide this one is named Inspector and mentally dock yourself a point for smudges. By the time you're back inside, the sun is high and the wind has picked up. You boil water, pour tea, and sit by the window. The horizon looks endless, but today it feels less menacing, more like a silent companion. You sip, thinking of how monotonous and yet oddly satisfying this existence has become. In the afternoon, you carry a chair up to the lantern room. You've checked, polished, adjusted, there's little left to do but keep watch. So you sit, logbook at your side, and gaze out over the shifting waters. Time slides strangely here. Hours can crawl or vanish. You find yourself counting the seconds between waves, tapping a rhythm on your knee, humming a tune you can't quite place. Historians still argue whether this kind of isolation strengthened the mind or slowly frayed it. Some accounts suggest keepers became more patient, contemplative, even philosophical. Others describe men and women cracking under the pressure, driven to paranoia or despair. You shift uneasily in your chair, aware that both paths are open in front of you. You joke to yourself, let's hope I land in the philosophical hermit category rather than the dull conspiracy theorist one. As the sun dips, you climb down and prepare dinner. Tonight it's beans and a heel of bread. You stir them in the pot until the smell fills the small room. Simple, hearty, endlessly repetitive. You shovel it in with little ceremony and wonder, not for the first time, how on earth sailors fantasize about land food when this is what they imagine they'll get. Evening settles into its familiar ritual. You ascend the stairs, your steps echoing, and pause before the great lamp. You trim the wick, strike the match, and watch the flame flare. Slowly it steadies, captured by the glass, amplified by the lens, and hurled into the dusk. The beam arcs across the water like a sword of light, clean and unwavering. You lean against the railing, breathing in the smell of oil and smoke, and feel a kind of pride. You may be alone, but your work stretches miles into the dark. Later, after the final check, you descend once more, oil lamp in hand. The walls throw long shadows, the air thick with quiet. You slip back into your narrow bed, the mattress groaning as though it shares your exhaustion. The waves continue their steady drumming outside, unending, tireless. You listen until the rhythm blurs into something softer, like a lullaby. Your last thought before sleep, maybe tomorrow will be exactly the same, and maybe that's not so bad. Morning creeps in reluctantly, the kind of gray dawn that makes you question whether the sun actually rose at all or if the world simply got marginally lighter. You shuffle from bed, rubbing your eyes, and mutter something about needing just 5 more hours. But no, the logbook won't fill itself, and the lamp won't tend itself, and apparently breakfast doesn't leap onto the table either. The glamorous life of a lighthouse keeper, right? You shuffle to the table, open the log, and scrawl, foggy, damp, visibility poor. The letters blot slightly, the ink unwilling to dry in this moisture. You blow on the page and smirk, your grand legacy, right there in smudged handwriting, the thrilling record of damp air. You cut yourself a slice of bread that seems more like a plank than food, chew thoughtfully, and sip your weak tea. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn groans. Mainstream historical fact: by the late 19th century, many lighthouses were equipped with fog signals, often trumpeted through enormous horns or fired as cannons, to warn ships in low visibility. Some keepers had to run outside and crank giant machines by hand, so next time you complain about pulling weeds, imagine that as your chore. The morning passes in a blur of ordinary tasks. You sweep the lantern room, wipe away yesterday's soot from the wick housing, and check the oil level. Everything gleams, though the fog presses in like a living thing, dampening the light to a halo instead of a blade. You lean against the cool glass and peer into the murk, half convinced the world has shrunk down to just you and a circle of gray. By midday, you decide to tackle one of the endless odd repairs. Today, the trapdoor on the third landing. It creaks ominously every time you pass, and you're half convinced it's plotting to collapse beneath you at the worst possible moment. Tools in hand, you crouch, hammer lightly, and tighten screws. The whole process is fiddly, the wood swollen with moisture, but you manage. And yet, just as you're congratulating yourself, you give the trapdoor a test step and creak. It still sounds like a groaning ghost. Quirky tidbit: some keepers gave names to parts of their towers: the moaning stair, the singing door, the grumpy stove. You decide this one is Old Complainer, and you promise to keep an eye on it. The afternoon brings an odd mood. Perhaps it's the fog, or the endless rhythm of tasks, but you feel caught in a strange loop. Time here doesn't just stretch, it folds, curls back on itself. You recall yesterday's polishing, last week's sweeping, last month's log entries, and they all blur. Was it different? Or is it all the same? Historians still argue whether lighthouse life eroded a person's sense of time or sharpened it. Some journals show meticulous day-by-day detail, as if to anchor reality. Others grow vague, drifting into musings about eternity, stars, and the sea. You feel a twinge of both. To shake it off, you brew another pot of tea and sit by the window. You squint into the fog, imagining ships out there, their captains peering desperately for your light. You wonder if anyone at this very moment feels relief because they see your beam slicing faintly through the haze. The thought steadies you. Dinner is stew. You threw everything remotely edible into the pot this morning, and now it smells tolerable. You spoon it up with the solemnity of someone eating a sacred ritual meal, though honestly, the carrots are mush and the broth tastes suspiciously metallic. Still, you grin. You've definitely eaten worse. Remember that biscuit from last month that could have doubled as a doorstop? You survived that, you'll survive this. Evening brings the climb, the wick, the match. The flame flares, your shadow dances, and the great glass magnifies the fire until it feels like the lighthouse itself is alive, breathing out light. You linger, hands on the railing, gazing into the fog as if it might suddenly part to reveal something wondrous or ominous. Later, as you descend, lamp in hand, the spiral stair feels longer than usual, as though the tower is stretching itself in the mist. You pause halfway, listening. The foghorn moans again, distant but powerful, and the sound vibrates in your bones. You imagine it's a voice, calling through the gray, a reminder that though you are isolated, you are not forgotten. In your room, you settle into bed. The mattress sighs, the sea thrums, the fog presses close. You pull the blanket tight and close your eyes, drifting into the slow, heavy rhythm of sleep. You think one last thought before slipping under: maybe tomorrow will bring sun, or maybe just another endless stretch of gray, but either way, you'll be here, and the light will burn. Morning greets you with a pale wash of silver, the kind of dawn that almost forgets to arrive. You drag yourself from bed, joints creaking nearly as much as that cursed third landing trapdoor you fixed yesterday, well, fixed being a generous word. You mutter a good-natured curse at both your knees and Old Complainer as you shuffle to the logbook. You dip your pen, jot the date and record, visibility fair, slight swell, gulls noisy as debt collectors. You pause to blow on the ink and chuckle. Posterity will definitely thank you for that poetic flourish. Breakfast is a humble affair, yesterday's bread and a smear of butter that looks and tastes suspiciously like wax. You chew anyway, staring out the small window at the restless gray sea. In the distance, a single ship creeps across the horizon, sails straining, its course steady. You feel a flicker of pride, your light work through the night. Somewhere on that vessel, a sailor might be tipping his cap in silent thanks. Mainstream historical fact: lighthouse keepers were often credited in shipping logs for their role in safe arrivals. Entire captains' reports would note light seen at such and such hour, passage made without incident. It was as close as keepers came to fame. After the meal, you stretch your legs outside. The air carries the sharp tang of salt, and the gulls will overhead, squawking like tiny sky pirates. You glance at the vegetable patch, a few limp greens bravely holding their ground in the poor soil. You pluck one leaf, chew it, and grimace. Crunchy, yes. Flavorful, no. But hey, scurvy hasn't gotten you yet, so who are you to complain? Quirky tidbit: some keepers swore by planting odd things in poor soil, including coffee grounds, fish guts, or even powdered seashells as fertilizer. Did it work? Debatable, but the gulls certainly approved. The afternoon drags in with the peculiar emptiness of routine. You polish the lamp glass again, though it barely needs it. You sweep the stairwell, only to realize you swept it yesterday. You stop halfway down, broom in hand, and laugh aloud at yourself. The glamorous life, you say to no one, your voice echoing up the hollow tower. Sometimes it feels like the stones themselves are your only companions. As evening shadows lengthen, you wander into a corner of your memory. You recall how, years ago, you imagined this post would be adventure, wild storms, heroic rescues, daring feats. Instead, most days blur into cleaning, logging, eating, and sleeping. Yet in this monotony, you found a strange comfort, like a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether keepers grew content with routine or suffered slow mental erosion. Some diaries show gratitude for the steady rhythm, others spiral into bleak notes about isolation. You sigh softly. Maybe it's both. Dinner tonight is salt pork, boiled until it surrenders. It's hearty, if not inspiring. You chase it with weak tea and a biscuit that feels like gnawing on a roof shingle. You shake your head, remembering sailors' jokes: hardtack isn't food, it's ammunition. Honestly, not wrong. Then comes your sacred climb, lamp oil sloshing in the can, breath slowing as you ascend. Each step feels deliberate, a ritual, as though the tower itself expects you. At the lantern room, you strike the match, trim the wick, and coax the flame into life. The lens gathers it, magnifies it, hurls it into the night like a spear. You stand quietly, watching the beam sweep, sweep, sweep. The fog has thinned tonight, so the light leaps far, a promise on the sea. You linger there long after your duties are done, leaning against the glass. The stars are faint but steady above, and the horizon glows faintly with moonlight. You wonder if sailors out there see the stars or if your beam drowns them out. Either way, you've given them a landmark, a point to measure against the endless dark. You smile, just a little, and whisper, "You're welcome." Later, back in your small quarters, you prepare for bed. You wash your face with cool water, pull the blanket up, and listen to the sea's restless hush. The tower groans faintly, the old stones settling, and the gulls call one last time before silence takes them. You stretch, close your eyes, and let the rhythm of waves carry you towards sleep. As you drift, you realize, perhaps it's not the storms or the rescues that define a keeper's life. Perhaps it's this, day after day of tending the flame, keeping the record, steady as the heartbeat of the coast. Entirely unremarkable, yes. But quietly essential. The night drapes itself heavy over your tower, darker than ink spilled across the horizon. You wake briefly, not from any alarm, but because old bones and restless habits no longer let you sleep straight through. You sit up, pull your shawl tighter, and pad barefoot to the narrow window. The sea is a shifting sheet of charcoal, and your beam cuts across it with perfect, mechanical patience. Sweep, sweep, sweep. Like a giant clock whose pendulum happens to save lives. You light a stub of candle and make the last entries of the day. The pen scratches softly, words forming without much effort, light trimmed at dusk, weather fair, no vessels near. You pause, tapping the quill against your chin, then add almost whimsically, "Dreamt of apples. Taste still sharp upon waking." You grin at yourself. Posterity won't care, but you will, tomorrow, when you reread and wonder how your mind conjured such luxuries. Mainstream historical fact: many 19th century keepers left behind logbooks that blended practical duty with private musings, little diaries masquerading as maritime records. You set the pen aside, blow the candle, and settle again into the hush. There's a stillness in this hour that feels like a reward, as though the tower has accepted your stewardship one more night. The walls breathe around you. The gulls are finally silent. Even old complainer upstairs rests, no creaks, no groans. You smile, grateful. Your dreams, when they come again, are soft. A meadow, an orchard, voices you half remember. Sometimes you wonder if it's the sea whispering into your sleep, or if your mind invents companions just to keep you whole. Quirky tidbit: some keepers swore they heard voices in the wind, entire conversations carried on the draft around the lantern. A few claimed to hear songs, old hymns, folk tunes, though others insisted it was simply wind whistling through iron braces. You're not sure which comforts you more, science or superstition. The morning is gray, as though the sun rolled over and decided to take another nap. You eat your breakfast, log the hour, and climb the tower for your last daily tending. You pour the oil carefully, polish the lamp, and stand in silence as daylight makes your beam redundant. There's a solemnity to it, like tucking a child into bed after a long night awake. You descend slowly, pausing to rest your hand on the banister. Each groove, each scar in the wood tells you stories you've lived but forgotten. The tower itself has become a journal in stone, and you, just another of its scribes. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers considered themselves temporary custodians or permanent guardians of their towers. Some treated the post as a station on a career ladder, others as a calling they would never relinquish. You suspect you've landed somewhere in the middle. This tower both belongs to you and doesn't, a paradox you've made peace with. Lunch is modest, salt fish and bread again, though you chew with a kind of ceremony. Every bite is a punctuation mark in a life that seems endless in its ordinariness, yet not without a quiet dignity. You sip weak tea, glance at the logbook, and think, one day this handwriting may be dust, but the light will still shine, tended by someone else. The afternoon brings no visitors, no letters, no drama. And yet, in its emptiness, there's fullness. You step outside, the sea breeze sharp, the gulls once again screeching like unpaid landlords. You laugh at them, toss a crumb of bread, and watch the chaos erupt in midair. Entertainment, free of charge. As evening rolls in, you light the lamp again, the act now so ingrained you could do it blindfolded. The match flares, the wick catches, and the lens magnifies. The sweep begins. A metronome for mariners. A heartbeat for the coast. You stand there, hands folded, listening to the silence between sweeps. It feels, in this moment, like the tower itself breathes with you. And so ends your day. Entirely unremarkable, utterly essential, and stitched together by ritual. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, until someone else takes the duty. That is the life of a lighthouse keeper in the 19th century, nothing flashy, nothing heroic most of the time, but the world a little safer for it. You head down, stretch your limbs, and tuck yourself into the same narrow bed. The sea hums its lullaby through the stones, and your last thought before sleep is that you have kept the light, faithfully, another day. The waves roll slow now, each one folding over the next with the softness of a blanket being laid across a bed. You can feel the stillness of the tower, the way its stones seem to sigh, as though they too are ready to rest. Your breath eases into rhythm with the sea, gentle, unhurried, steady as the sweep of the lantern above. The gulls have gone quiet, their cries replaced by silence, broken only by the occasional low groan of the wood as the tower settles deeper into night. It's a silence that doesn't demand anything from you. It simply wraps around you, like a shawl pulled close on a cool evening. The lamp is burning well, the wick trimmed, the glass polished. Its light sweeps far into the darkness, steady, tireless. You don't need to tend it now. It will do its work while you rest. And you, too, have earned that rest. Think of the sea, stretching far beyond sight, calm tonight, its surface carrying the beam as a silver thread. Ships may pass, sailors may glance toward the glow, but none will know the keeper who watched, who climbed, who polished, who waited. That anonymity is its own peace. You are not required to be remembered loudly. You are remembered quietly, in safe harbors and in voyages completed without incident. Your hands can finally be still. No logbook to fill, no oil to pour, no stairs to climb. The work is done for now. And the rhythm that carried you through each day, the sweep of the light, the hush of the sea, the rise and fall of your breath, remains, lulling you deeper into calm. There's nothing urgent left. The world can wait. The tower holds itself upright, the lamp tends itself now. You may let your shoulders sink, your eyes soften, your mind drift like a boat rocking gently at anchor. The night grows quieter still, the kind of quiet that feels endless, generous, forgiving. The stones, the sea, the very air seem to hum in harmony, coaxing you to let go. You're safe. You're steady. You're exactly where you need to be. So close your eyes. Feel the stillness lengthen, stretch, and settle. Let the sea carry you, not into storms, not into labor, but into the gentle, endless dark where nothing is asked of you but to rest. Sleep comes easy now, as inevitable as the tide, as soothing as the lighthouse beam sweeping, sweeping, sweeping across the quiet sea. Good night, keeper.